It is March 4th, 2020, and I'm calling the Board of Health meeting to order.
I've been here for a while.
And we have,
He was not.
hi, we have a variance hearing and a number of scheduled appointments and
Never mind.
other items of business. So also at this time, I am to announce any items to be added to the agenda is not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting. So we have one item of a building application for discussion for 48 Hollis. Are there any other items that we need to be adding?
So I guess my only other questions, I think for the COVID-19 initiative plan for the school discussion, I think we may have a broader discussion of that.
Yep, so we'll expand, all right, and then the other is expansion of our discussion of COVID-19, which stands for Coronavirus ID, and then 19 stands for 2019 when it appeared. Okay, so we have those two items, and do we have a motion to add them to the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we have, where is the food inspection? Food approval. Two. Yes, okay. All right, we have a new food establishment permit application for approval, and it's for Table 15 LLC for a residential kitchen. And note that it will require a sodium posting because the level of sodium is above the standard. And we have a report from the food inspector who found no deficiencies at all and has made a recommendation for approval. So does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Seemed good. I read it.
I'm totally intrigued about setting posting in the home kitchen, but as long as you don't mind, we don't mind.
So I would assume that the food inspector went over how to handle that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
So, he has the authority. All right. So do we have a motion to approve the food establishment permit?
So moved. Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any questions at any time? Contact the office, and then Ellen will let the food inspector know if it's something that she can't answer.
Okay.
Okay?
Great. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. And our next item, we are going to discuss the COVID-19, and we'll save, well, we'll discuss it now, and there may be discussion later on tonight as well. But would you like to?
Well, I guess my one question, do you want to just go over the other food inspection permits, just since we did one, do you want to finish them all out?
Well, since we have a visitor from
Perfect.
Dover
Sounds
Board
good.
of Health, I
Sounds
think it would be good to make sure that we get it done.
Perfect. So I think that the piece we're going to start off with, just because I know Ellen's fielded a number of calls, I think the school's fielded a number of calls, is just to kind of give a general update about what we've done so far, and then a couple of the guiding principles to kind of get endorsement from the Board of Health to make sure that goes on track with the desires of the larger board. So the first piece we talked about was questions related to guidance to the schools and recent travelers. We've got an updated guidance today from DPH that recommended that all travelers to level 3 travel advisory areas self-quarantine for 14 days. There's additional guidance that we've sought from DPH in terms of enforcement. Our current understanding is that these are voluntary self-quarantines and that they're not going to be actively tracked or kind of managed by local boards of health. I think that the other piece that came up in this conversation was just philosophically, what approach will the board take? I think this is something we think about a lot in the context of Sherborn's other health-related regulations, like our septic setbacks and wells. And I think that from my standpoint, I think this is a key principle for us to talk about. There's a logic for why we have regulations that are distinct from those of the state for things like septic setbacks or regulations in the context of not having a public water supply or wastewater treatment plant. I think the idea of Sherborn exceptionalism for issues around public health is harder to assert, and so I think our rationale was that it made sense to really leverage existing resources, particularly the DPH for the state, to provide us guidance about what actions we'll take rather than developing regulations independent of the state, both because the state has special knowledge that we may not have access to in terms of protected health information related to communities around us or elsewhere in the county, and also because they have the added expertise. I think the other thing I identified is working with the Dover Board of Health, that this is, especially as it relates to the school, a critical areas for us to collaborate and to be consistent. And also as we think about how do we build resilient resources if the COVID really does become wide community prevalence, and how do we think about cross support and doing those pieces, that felt like a good opportunity for active collaboration. And I think that's one of the things we'll work on, particularly as it relates to the school and the guidance for the school district and being consistent there. Through the set of meetings that we have set up to help facilitate, I think that's in addition to the work that Ellen's doing with the emergency preparedness committee. Maybe Ellen, can you talk about that for a second? The one that's Monday at 1.
That's the local emergency planning committee, LEPC, in town. Fire chief, police, DPW director, Barbara Brown from Pine Hill School was invited, Council on Aging director. Might be a couple more that I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was active several years ago, and then police and fire started going to regional emergency planning committees meetings. But today there was a department head meeting, and we felt it would be important to start meeting again.
Yeah. And then I think the other things we sort of talked about and looked at is revisiting our emergency operations plan and our continuity plan to ensure that the Board of Health is able to do its core function should we have a larger impacting infection, and sort of what those pieces are. I think our hope is that none of this planning proves to be necessary, but again, if it does, boy, we'll be glad we did it. I'm really glad of a spare tire. I haven't needed to change it in 15 years, but boy, I want it on the car. And so I think that's how we're kind of thinking about this. I think I'm really excited about the opportunity to collaborate with Dover, because I think this is a place that feels like putting our heads together is a great place to have a discussion. And I think there was a nice example today of kind of a multi-part discussion with the school, with the towns, kind of coming to quick conclusions, reaching out to DPH and getting clear guidance and being able to answer questions. And that felt like that really was us working collectively, which feels like one of the most important things in the kind of weeks and months ahead.
So I'll go back just for a little history, and we can come back. So I would say starting in January, we started communicating with the Dover Board of Health and the schools around this issue in general. And certainly, as you all know, it's just been evolving and changing quite rapidly. So we're working to keep up with that. Another piece of information is that Ellen, as she's just mentioned, has participated not just in the LEPC that she mentioned, but also we're part of a region for emergency preparedness, and so she's participated in that for a long time, is very well respected within that organization, and has a lot of knowledge, and has the experience of having gone through the H1N1 episode in the past. So no two events are ever going to look alike, but there's a lot of knowledge that she has to help guide us. And then, so we have Dr. Stephen Crooksall here from the Dover Board of Health, so he's just one of the representatives. And as we said, we went to their meeting on Monday. Seems like a long time ago, given how much communication there's been in the past few days. Yeah. Seems like a week ago. But so we are closely following things. We are getting notifications. Ellen and Matt and members of the Dover Board of Health and staff participated in the DPH, Department of Public Health, State Department of Public Health, call on Monday, right, Monday afternoon. So we're just going to, yes?
I don't want to interrupt you. Todd, I'm Jeff Waldron from the Select Board in Sherborn. I think it's really important what we're doing, coordinating with the state and educating the population of Dover and Sherborn. My focus too on the Select Board is there, in coordination with the state, there may be certain tiers or stages of responses the state deems necessary. One of my focuses is getting the Select Board prepared to at least know what those stages are. We don't know when they might be triggered, but if a stage is, let's say all town employees have to work from home, we could plan now for how we cause that to happen or what the steps are to cause each one of those things to happen. So it's making them understand. It's part of the emergency action plan that Matt talked about. But I'm just trying to make people on other departments in town aware of the kinds of actions they may have to take and be prepared if they're required to do it instead of scrambling at the last minute. So.
And that's also why, Jeff has agreed to be one of the representatives from the Select Board. We've formed kind of a smaller group, or are still in process of forming that, so that folks from a wide range of perspectives within town can get together, the emergency, the EMS staff and police and what have you, so.
And I think it's also just like figuring out how do we keep communication efficient, and so I think trying to figure out like 5 people emailing 5 people and then the back and forth can get tricky both in terms of open meeting requirements and then also just efficiency of communication. And so I think identifying partners within the different boards to say this is the person who's going to help bring that select board lens to this response. And I think that's a sort of supplement to the emergency committee and any inside command centers or other pieces that become active. So I don't think it's intended to supplant that, but just to kind of think about how do we make sure these pieces work well together.
And I'll say that the school has been very good. They get information through
I think they also get a mix of like
school
schools and also
administrative
DPH.
departments in the state and DPH. And so, and again, we've been communicating with them a lot as well
So,
to work on this. But go ahead.
so I see the updated guidance from the state epidemiologist, and I think it's pretty logical, and it sort of breaks it into 2 pieces for returnees from level 2 and level 3 countries. So basically that, that travelers to China and Iran are tracked by the CDC, but there's other level 3 countries like Italy and South Korea currently that the CDC does not track. So one of my questions is, so how would we, and the recommendation is if you come back from a level 3 country that there's a self-quarantine for 14 days. So how do we know that information?
So I don't think we'll know that. I think it's a voluntary quarantine, and so I think it's,
Well, and disclosure.
so I think that they are encouraged to, but not required to disclose, and so
Right.
I think that these are all sort of anticipatory guidance as opposed to an enforceable mechanism. So I don't think there's a way for us to know that people have the travel since it won't be disclosed to us necessarily.
Yep.
Um,
But so my question was going to be, so is this communication, and maybe this is kind of in line with what Jeff is saying, is this just a blanket communication we're going to send out or provide to all residents in
I think
Dover
that's
and
like one of the
Sherborn?
questions for us tonight is to think a
Yeah.
little bit about how much do we look. One of the things I'm concerned about, if we just watch a cadence of like what changed from when we were at Dover earlier in the week to today, and what changed over the course from yesterday to today, how do we stay current when the guidance may evolve very quickly, whether that's guidance around testing or quarantine or prevalence? And I worry a little bit about our ability to stay current. So what I would suggest that we sort of do is, we're not Boston, this isn't,
Right.
it doesn't have the same footprint. And so what I would suggest we do is, if we feel, if the sort of consensus of the board is that looking to the state for guidance and following state guidance is the right strategy, my thinking would be how do we make those resources available and how do we kind of communicate this is rapidly changing. And I worry about our ability to do a push, or if we say that we're doing a code red notification for every update, you sort of worry that that's gonna saturate people's awareness,
Right.
and if there's something really important, we'll miss it.
Right, and so I was thinking like, when there's a school delay or a traffic emergency, there's the broadcast that they call all of
The reverse 911.
yeah, the reverse 911 call, and so just making people aware that we have a policy and having current updates on the website, could be an easier way, so that way we're not trying to necessarily disseminate current information all the time to people, because I agree with you, oversaturation is a concern, but if we can direct them to, this
These are the key
is,
resources,
the
yeah.
key resources, then I think we can find an easier centralized way to communicate.
Right,
I don't know.
So, us in Dover were working on some of that. Where are the links that you would send people to get the latest and greatest information? Just as another point, so there is, yes,
At the appropriate time, I'd like to make a comment on the topic.
and you are,
I'm Phil Dormitzer, 73 Old Ocean
okay,
Road.
if you can hold on just a moment. And actually, okay, so we only have a few more minutes allocated at this time slot, and we expect to be revisiting this topic later on after your other issue. But anyway, on infectious diseases, once it's confirmed that there's a case of an infectious disease, that is tracked by the state, and there's a system that information is entered into. It's called MAVEN, and then that is checked daily by Board of Health staff, usually the visiting nurses that we have, and we share a visiting nurse association.
And we do as well.
And, yeah, right, so our staff and then also the visiting nurses with Dover, so there's kind of nice carryover there in that they're familiar with both towns. So that is confidential information, but it is something that it is the responsibility of, again, Board of Health staff and agents to check on those folks, on how they're doing and what their behaviors are and the rest. So, but that's once it's confirmed as
Right.
being an infectious disease.
And so, maybe just before Dr. Dormitzer, I guess, Stephen, we've talked a lot about the Dover Board of Health. Does that kind of match up with your recollection and kind of where you guys landed after our meeting earlier in the week?
Right, and did we miss anything critical?
You haven't missed anything. I'm struck by your implication that Ellen has direct access to Maven. We do not.
Oh,
We had to go through a training, and we went to a training for it, both Jean and I.
And so would it be appealing to kind of connect more to, like, if the Dover Board wanted to find out more, what's possible now in terms of getting Maven access? Because it certainly.
We sought access
And-
and it was denied.
Huh. When did you guys do the
Oh,
training?
a long time ago. Long time ago.
all right, so I would guess that Karen could call Ellen.
I could give her who to call at Maven.
Right.
That's a
Yeah,
thing,
She
so
your
I can-
counterpart for Dover.
Dover, apparently, yes.
But I think it would also be fine to share, in the town next door that we share a school district with, they have access and we don't have access. And I think that would certainly, from our standpoint, be entirely fine to share.
I don't have access to Dover's.
No, but I think the point
Yeah.
of, you can't deny one small town
Oh,
with a
I see
population of
what you're
about
saying.
4,000 and approve another.
They
You need to
actually
be-
have more
yeah.
people.
Right. But I think in either case,
Yeah,
like, I think
they-
just understanding what was the
Very
difference and how
strict.
can we get in that bucket? Because it seems like if there's a time that may have been access, maybe particularly pertinent, that certainly feels like one of those times. And then Dr. Dormitz, I think you had a comment as well.
Sure. Did you want to comment on the coronavirus or on the other issue?
Oh, no.
No, we're coronavirus right now.
Coronavirus for this job.
So I also have a sort of a specific suggestion, proposal. I'm actually an infectious disease physician and a virologist, and I lead viral vaccine research and development for Pfizer. In fact, I'm working on the coronavirus. In fact, there's the White House presentation on Monday. My boss actually went, not me, but so containment of viral diseases is kind of something I do for a living. And I definitely appreciate the school's position that we should follow state and CDC guidance. Frankly, the state and CDC guidance is pretty weird. It identifies countries that are level 3 transmission, China, of course, Northern Italy and others. Yet, if someone's coming back from China, they recommend 14 days of self-quarantine, which is very sensible. If they're coming back from a European country, they don't recommend that.
That's a memo, they revised it
They
today.
did.
Oh, they revised it today?
Yeah, so
They
they're now
okay, so
recommending
everything,
self-quarantine for all level 3 countries.
Wonderful.
Which I think is based on revised CDC guidance, so we got that about 3:30 this afternoon.
and that was my point, is that because there's so much asymptomatic transmission, really anyone coming back from a level 3, and if that's done, that, I need to say more, so it's not sound like this is gonna happen.
And so I think the other thing we sort of just talked about at the beginning, I think that one of the pieces that I think the previous issue raised is just thinking about how do we make choices. And I think that what we sort of talked about as a board is one of the guiding principles. As much we sort of have a piece of Sherborn exceptionalism that we believe is pertinent related to septics and wells, just because of the paucity of other communities that have no wastewater treatment, no public water supply of significant impact. I think in this case, we felt like from a public health standpoint, going by the guidance of the state, even if it may be somewhat different than what we would pick, since knowledge isn't symmetric and there may be things that PPH knows that we don't know or haven't been disclosed, I think that's kind of our guiding principle and what I would anticipate going forward. And I think for all of these pieces, it'll be a balance of how do we balance safety and disruption, which I'm sure you're savvy to as well in terms of just thinking about how do we minimize the degree that's disrupted. So for example, like in our town, there are many physicians that work in Boston that may participate in the care of COVID patients in other parts.
Yes.
And many providers, nurses, pharmacists, other folks who may have contact, certainly for yourself working in the area, whether it's in the lab or not, and just thinking about how do we balance this. And I think that our feeling has been looking to state guidance to make sure that we can kind of say to people, why are you doing this to me? To be able to say this is the larger framework that we're making a decision part of. But I think that the other thing I would say is I think one of the pieces that was more active with H1N1 that we're also thinking about how do we re-engage is as we think about the quarantine impacts and other impacts that China put in place, which certainly I think are unlikely to be replicated here, or we think about what are the risks for different age demographics, which may be very different, thinking about how to engage qualified, capable community members in things like the Medical Reserve Corps or other areas. So I would say for both people watching YouTube, if people are interested and want to be engaged, I think there will be a big need if this becomes a big problem for lots of people. There will be plenty for us to collectively do. And so I think if folks are interested, that's another way to be involved. Although also if you can make a vaccine super duper fast, we won't mind.
Good.
Does that sound right?
Or a drug.
Yes, so that's
Or drug.
actually
I'm cheerfully flexible.
Yeah.
good plug for anyone who would like to get involved. Just contact the Board of Health office and could sign you up if you want to help. We have something called a Medical Reserve Corps, so.
And you don't have to be in the medical profession.
So I think we're at 7:30, and so Brett, maybe we can table coronavirus and COVID for the moment and then circle back if there's more discussion after the schedule. Does that sound good?
Yep. And it would probably be after 8:45.
Perfect.
What the schedule is that we have, so. Okay, so it's 7:30 and we have a variance hearing for septic replacement at 15 Wildwood Drive, and we have all of the green cards.
I have not gotten them yet.
Other countries, yeah.
You're almost in a mess. I like the suspense. There's usually not enough suspense with these things.
Be another condition then.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
In a normal set of circumstances, I probably would have called you to find out where they were, but I've been busy.
Absolutely.
I'll only need it when we get to the, oh, that's pretty, I couldn't.
He's like, that's
No.
just what I want to hear.
Good evening, Dan McIntyre, representing the homeowners. They're,
Okay, so before we start, are there any abutters to this property? Which is, did I say 15 Wildwood Drive? Okay, so we'll do well, not too streamlined, but also if there's anyone who just wants to see what he's explaining, feel free, because he's going to explain the conditions at the site and why variances are needed. And we consider variances for replacement and repair systems because they're doing it because there's something not appropriate about the system as it is or for future use, and so we're looking for environmental improvement overall. Excellent.
Wildwood Drive is down here. This is a long, steep driveway up to the top of the hill. This particular area is known for shallow bedrock, and we were able to find it. We kind of dug over into the hillside here, and we got rock very quickly. So we continued to move down slope toward the existing system, which is right in kind of the middle of the yard. And we got progressively better as we went in this direction. We still hit ledge at every hole. But we found enough suitable soil essentially in the area of the existing system to replace it in that area. So what we're proposing to do is use an alternative technology system. Not because we need the groundwater offset, we're proposing a 4-foot groundwater offset here. But because we've got the shallow ledge, we've only got a little over 4 feet of ledge as well. So we wanted to try to get enhanced treatment using the IA technology before it hit the ledge and started running downhill. So we did have, as I said, we did have groundwater essentially running on top of the ledge here, and that was our high groundwater determined by the models. So we're asking for a 4-foot offset to that rather than the normal 5 feet in Sherborn, which meets Title V and is an improvement over the existing system. One of our test pits actually went through the existing system because we wanted to kind of prove out that we had enough soil beneath the system there. So we were able to do that. It was a fairly quick hole because once we get down to the ledge, it started collapsing and then all the effluent flew into the hole. We did prove that out. The other variance is the offset to ledge. Sherborn has a 6-foot offset to ledge. We have 4.7 in this area here. It progressively increases if you look at the profile as we go downhill. The refusal goes downhill. So we've got 4.7 here. We've got over 6 feet on the other side of the system. But we're asking for that waiver as well.
Okay. And, all right, and I see
all
the,
the well offsets.
right, so we have there's a radius around the wells that we seek to preserve, both for the on-site well and any neighboring wells. And once you draw those arcs or circles, they block out a fair amount of the property as available for installing septic. And then, as you mentioned, it's not ideal conditions,
No,
really.
This is a very steep hill to climb up that way, so the whole backyard is kind of a very steep area. The front yard is also steep as well, so we're really limited in what with this.
Okay. And so what is the IA technology that you're using?
It's a geomat,
Okay.
so it's a true pressure distribution bed, each bed, so that's why we asked for that way. It gives us kind of a low profile, but it also is in a wet state for that enhanced treatment that we could go as close to 2 feet to the groundwater. We don't need to do that here, but I think it's worth it.
That's nice. So there'll be an extra, and Mark, this is the one where it'll evenly distribute the effluent throughout the system, so it's not overloading in any one area, which is the other advantage. So there's more soil being affected by less. Okay. All right, so we'll go through each of the waiver requests, and then, I don't know, does anyone have any other questions now? Mark, do you have any particular comments about the plan?
The site was difficult in respect to the ledge, as noted. That was some of the major challenges. When we go to install the septic system, not we, but when the installer installs the septic, we may have to make some additional decisions on if we hit ledge at a higher point, but there are ways to go about just moving some of the base soil into a void if there's a void. But Dan and I already talked about that, so we'll go over that at pre-construction.
Okay, and did you design for a garbage grinder? Okay, so that'll,
What's the existing system? Just curious. How old is the house? What's the existing system? Oh, so it's not. It doesn't matter. Just curious.
okay. All right, so do we have a motion to grant a variance to 8.01?
Second.
Any other questions? Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Do we have a motion to grant a variance to section 8.02? And there are two parts to that, both seasonal high groundwater and depth to ledge.
So moved. Second.
And any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll close the hearing, and are the plans ready for
Plans are ready
approval?
for approval.
Subject to?
Subject to 2 deed recordings, one for the garbage grinder and one for the innovative alternative technology. And in the long run, the pre-construction, we'll go over any minor details that need to be reviewed,
Okay,
as well as major details.
all right. So do we have a motion to approve the plans subject to those 2 deed recordings being received?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Well, thank you
We're
very
on
much.
time. Thank you.
Do you think we can fit
Oh,
both the
did you get
green
so you're all set with green cards, even though?
Yes, she
Yes,
did.
excellent.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Do you think we can do well read in 3 minutes?
These are,
Maybe. 29 Rockwood, is that a 3-minute topic?
Well, it could be a little bit less, could be a little more. They originally came in to deepen the well, now they wish to also put another well in. The only issue that the board will need to decide on is they want to keep both wells.
That's not a short discussion.
That's a no-brainer.
Okay.
That's
I
fast.
didn't think so. That's why I wanted to note that, and it's up to you how you felt.
Okay, cell phone for camp inspector.
We have a regulation that prohibits more than one well per residence.
I see, okay.
Yeah, it's a regulation.
So as part of getting the approval for the new well, we'll need to decommission
Decommission.
the well.
Yeah.
And in the
That would
process
be our
of us-
preference, I'll tell you that right now. We can have a discussion, but that is our preference.
The only reason why the request was open was because we were concerned that we might not necessarily find enough capacity, or the new well that we do might not have enough capacity to also satisfy our irrigation needs. That was the only reason why we thought that
Okay, so
would be there.
we could also explain thoughts on irrigation as well, and the difficulties of having 2 wells on the property, but we'll get to that a little later. So maybe we could do the food establishment permit. Where was that other one?
Oh,
Wasn't
the,
there a second one that you mentioned?
There's inspection reports.
Special purchase item. These guys.
Oh, just a minute. Oh, that's maybe not a minute.
oh, okay.
Oh, unless,
Any significant concerns?
no, I think there was only really one. There were
I think
a
maybe
few
that
that
was
had no issues, but they were pretty small.
No, there's some issues.
You want to look at the upper right column of the
See
front
here?
page, that's where
Okay.
your critical
Now,
items
They all
are.
had issues.
Violation.
Can we do?
Where you see
camp
1, 2,
inspector
3,
cell phone in 1 minute?
3/4 to
Let's go check
I
cell
don't
phone.
That's down.
Okay. All right, so
It's the
the,
first page.
So circle back to food inspector, we'll circle back to some.
Issues in this too.
okay, but cell phone for the food inspector, it would be the food and camp inspector. It would be helpful for him, especially given public records requirements that we get him a phone. So are there any issues that anyone sees with
Is that consistent
adding
with
him
sort
to
of
the
other?
budget?
That's consistent with what we do for other folks in other Woods in town?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And not all of our agents have wanted yet another
Yeah.
phone to carry around, so,
He prefers not to use his personal stuff.
Yeah.
yes.
Seems reasonable.
And not appropriate to use his Boston cell
Perfect.
phone, so.
Sounds
All right,
good.
so all those in favor of getting a cell phone for the food temp inspector? Oh, wait, we need a motion.
So moved? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll contact, I'll just send the request to Jeannie, she orders the phone, it goes, it'll probably go on the same bill as Mark's. And I'll let the finance director know, because that will have an impact on the budget. That had just been reviewed with advisory.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, up to our next 7:40. Okay. So Mark, maybe you want to describe where we are with 34 Great Rock now?
Well, first, just so the board knows, Joyce Hastings from GLM Engineering is available, and that's sitting right up front now. Hi, Joyce. And this plan was seen by the board at a previous meetings. It was approved a while back, and then it was discovered that the presentation of the plan had it as one lot. And we did call GLM, and they explained that it's in the same ownership, but we asked that it be shown as it exists, and then further decisions can be made. So GLM did resubmit the plan, and the plan has been resubmitted showing it as the two lots, but with the same ownership, which you can do as in respects to the definition of boundaries. If and whenever it does switch to possibly two different owners, it will then have to be updated. Possibly, and the state got involved, we had DEP, Claire Golden, give us advice. In that case, they would have to have an easement so they can keep maintenance and operation of the proposed septic system on the other lot available to the owner of 34 Great Rock Road.
Okay, and do we have a deed recording describing this situation?
Basically-
For the property? If we had talked about that as a possibility?
So there is, right now, the deed is one deed. And the current owner is the person, it's not in the name as it was originally submitted, it's in the name. If it got sold, it would be easier to make that deed, but right now, both lots are on the same deed, same ownership.
Okay.
And it's not outside the bounds of these requirements. It's clearly stated that the facility is any lot owned by, in the same name.
Okay, and so now the plan clearly shows where the lot lines are. So someone who was reviewing it could now see that the house is in one place and the barn another, and the septic, and, okay.
I added a note, just to make it, just to clarify it.
Okay.
But,
There still should be a deed recording because they're legally separate lots, even
Do you have a plan?
if they sell them, then
I can show you the plan. You don't even have to-
for, not for themselves, but for the next person.
So I just want to make sure that we're kind of specific, so we did a lot of parts. So it sounds like there was a concern about the clarity on the plan for lot lines. I don't mean compliant with
The
lot lines.
lot, the deed recording is for the lot, not for the owner.
This all came, I'm not sure how this all came about, but
Yeah.
it resulted in a letter that came to the homeowner and to everybody that
So-
was incorrect.
I'm sorry. You can come up and talk.
No, I mean, so all we did was I added this line here, and I added that note. And all it says, it's just stating what the deed says.
And I don't recall all the details. I remember there's a piece that touched on the 61D, but I don't remember if it.
Is that
Am I conflating this with another property?
Yeah, no, this is
Okay,
not.
perfect.
It did
Yeah.
say that. No, it said that.
It's just that,
Yeah, the larger Claire Golden.
that with the barn,
It
was-
says,
It needs-
it says the septic system is located on the 0 Great Rock Road 61B parcel.
yeah.
So that's, I think, what,
That's a communication from the property owner? or
that's from Ellen, and it's about Claire's, and the background
Yeah.
that was provided to DEP.
Yeah.
And her
And it
response.
is.
And I think Did part of the concern arise because someone had talked about separating off the back parcel?
That is correct. We did receive
So it was not
notice.
as a result of, no concern that someone could be confused in the future about what was possible and the infrastructure that was crucial to the home that was on that back parcel,
I have
so.
no issues with following these steps. I had an issue with the letter. I don't have any issue with the steps that we took to make you all comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I just want to clarify, so is there any, I just want to sort of explicitly confirm, I don't think we have any 61B concern now. That is correct?
I'm not aware that it has bearing on this, the
Perfect.
61B.
Same
I think it's
I don't
more
need
that
to add
they,
bearing, I just want to make sure and confirm in my own head there is no bearing, which sounds like that's the case.
Can I also ask a question? So my interpretation of the letter from Claire Golden was, because it's owned by the two lots are owned by the same owner, there's no risk. But that the deed recording should belong to the lot, regardless of the owner, because they're still distinct lots, unless the owner
So the
chooses
deed
to make it
recording-
into one lot.
For the deed recording that gets placed because we're using an alternative system will reference the deed, and it will reference both parcels.
Right, it has to reference both because
And so-
it's serving the other parcel.
Right.
I think our
So
big
it's
goal is
just to-
notification, so any future homeowner or property buyer with it, like our
So
goal for this is always to
Right.
say,
Look,
we want to
one
make sure
at a time.
nobody's
Right.
surprised, and
Okay.
it sounds like the deed recording is just.
It's covering
that.
both. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Thank you. I want to make sure I was interpreting it properly, because I think that's
That makes sense.
helpful.
okay. So, Mark, are you recommending approval?
I believe it resolves the concern about describing the lot as shown now is described properly. In that respect, it will always be on file. If it ever does get sold into a separate lot, we hope at that time, not hope, it will be required at that time to resolve easements at that point to protect the needs for operation and maintenance of the piping and leaching field that belongs to 34 Great Rock Road.
Right, because we don't want, let's just say,
Doesn't
worst
have to
case,
happen
if they
now.
had, if they separated this off, and who knows what, had a transaction that isolated that, they no longer had access, would they have to have a fully compliant system, because it would no longer be a replacement system for this lot up front that gets cut off? Is that correct?
So the
If
septic
something-
system being proposed is for 34 Great Rock Road, the
Yes.
house. The
Yes.
barn doesn't have a septic system, and in past years of testing, they haven't found an area yet that meets new construction. So with that said, and that's the discussion I had with the real estate agent who was referred to us from Mallory, from the Conservation Commission, is that they're welcome to go back out and try testing that lot to see if it can meet new construction. But I said at present, the house goes with it, because that's what we saw in the plan, and that's when all this discussion came up.
Okay. No, I'm just saying if somehow they cut off the back lot,
Then,
the front lot is in
They would have to
trouble,
put the septic in
potentially.
an easement, because they can't do the
exactly.
septic system.
Yeah, okay. Okay, all right. So do we have a motion to,
Okay, the only thing that's missing is the application to transfer the permit. Here it is. Okay. Thank you very much. So we have it.
okay.
Yeah.
Then do we have a motion to approve the plan, subject to anything?
they were required to do.
Oh,
a
yeah,
deed
we were still
recording.
waiting
Yeah,
for that,
trying to-
yes, okay.
And there was a Title V question on the sale of the home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to bring that up as part of this review, or...
Seems like, yeah, it's important to bring up.
So the issue became is that right now, there's not a certificate of compliance for the septic system because it's being proposed, not installed. With that said, the house sold, and we have heard there may be a Title V inspection for the transfer of the sale, but we haven't seen it.
I don't know that there is one. We have not laid our hands on one. I've asked
So
both the
what-
seller and the buyer, and we have not.
So what's the recourse if in fact it didn't happen?
They should do one.
There's a cesspool,
Yeah, so it's not gonna pass.
He determined, the homeowner decided that it wasn't going to pass and filed all his appropriate testing to do an upgrade
Yeah.
with a cesspool.
So you sort of said, I'm not gonna test because I'm confident in its failure.
Yes.
Okay.
Back then, it could have passed.
Yeah,
Right.
but
I would
now
say
we have a
keep-
regulation
Now-
anyway, so.
But they would have had a passing Title V back last year before the regulation
No,
changed.
but I think, like, for me,
Possible.
if I get a time
No, that's
machine, there's
good.
so much stuff I'm betting on.
Yeah.
But from that standpoint, we don't have one, so what we would, like, are we saying that the existing system needs to have it, or we're saying?
The existing system, the state code, Title V says you shall do a Title V
Even though we're
inspection.
replacing it.
So you don't need to do a Title V inspection on a new approved design for 2 years.
It's not a certificate of compliance. That's when you can substitute that for a Title V
I'm
inspection.
just trying to figure out what makes sense. Are we saying we're replacing a
So I
hole in
still
the
need to
ground?
get a certificate, I still need to go through the whole process. I
But
still
why-
need to install it.
Is this
Yeah,
in
that
yet? Is it?
No, this isn't
Right.
it, so.
No,
This is
but-
proposed.
But so, I just don't understand, if we're replacing a hole in the ground with the system, why is there, like, yes.
So
Title
I
V
think
is
you
required
just
for
need a
that.
piece of paper is what you're saying. that-
Well, the state code says that when you go to transfer the sale of a property, you need to do a Title V inspection. What can substitute for a Title V inspection is a certificate of compliance for an installed septic system.
Right, so they're in between.
That's not more than 2
Right.
years old or 3 years, or 3 years, not more than 3 years
What if
old.
we wait until after the septic system were installed and then issue a certificate of compliance?
Yeah.
It's just a lag time.
It's a
Because
lag.
it's sold already.
The transfer.
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
And that's what was in Claire, the memo I wrote when I spoke
I
to
don't want to
Claire.
ignore what she advises
She
to do.
just said they should do a Title V inspection.
Clean it up.
So a Title
Because
V
it's-
inspection
it
is something we already know
violates-
is gonna fail. It's
Yeah.
not
So just,
something-
can you just say that?
Send us a letter of
Can you just-
compliance after.
Yeah.
Yeah, you-
No, because
They're
it's
not-
not in yet and it's transferred, so it's already technically
already-
out
they
of
already own it.
compliance. But it's already technically out of compliance because the transfer happened.
But this is what can
prior to-
occur, so if a
Yeah.
Title V inspection's not completed, and you have a cesspool there, and
Yeah.
now it's failed per our requirements,
Right.
not state.
Yeah.
The state code says that you have to replace that septic system in 2 years from the time of the Title V inspection.
So
We don't have a Title V inspection.
they're
we
gonna
don't have
install
to-
the septic system as soon as we
Right.
get approvals.
So I
I've got
get-
the contract.
okay.
So
I
can
know-
we-
A little bit like I'm in like a Heller novel, like I'm just trying to figure out how to make this make sense.
Could we say that the time of inspection
There
is
you go.
equal to the time of transfer and that it has to be installed within 2
Installed.
years
You
of
might
transfer?
be able to do
How about
that.
that?
Yeah, I mean, really.
Can we do that?
I just
Although
don't
we
want to do
have,
it
There's
totally.
no danger to public health, because it's.
Right.
No, but I think there is, because if somebody opted not to do it and there's no inspection, we haven't set the clock, so I would be, but again, it just seems nuts to say spend money. Like, we've said you can't have a
Right.
cesspool, you're replacing the cesspool, we're saying spend money, if it passes Title V, we'll still say our regulations require you to replace the cesspool.
Right.
It just doesn't make
It's
sense
a
to
do
me.
loop of, for,
No,
right,
but I
no,
would
that's what I'm saying,
say
let's just change it from the
Either
point of
give us a
transfer.
Title V
Right,
or
from the date of
replace it and
transfer.
give us a letter of
Yeah.
compliance. That's
And so,
They need a certificate of compliance
Yeah.
within 2 years of the date of
Right.
transfer.
Yeah.
How about that?
That's perfect.
That's what I think.
Okay. Sounds good.
and is
In
it contrary
whichever
to
way.
what,
You are going against
Claire
the
Golden
state
said.
code.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, in our case, we have a
We
piece
had
of
a
our code that's
presumptive
independent,
failure.
Like, we've
Yeah.
said that cesspools need to be replaced at the time of transfer, and so I think we have even if it passed Title V, that wouldn't actually take them off the hook.
Right.
It means
They'd
replace
still
it
need to
by
do
our
it.
regulation. And so that's kind of my logic, is there's no pathway where this is on track if they don't replace the cesspool, whether or not it passes Title V or not. And so for me, particularly because we have a concrete plan, that like, it's our guidance to you guys that affected the timing. So you're like, I would have loved to do this in these like 50-degree days, I would not have minded doing it. It seems, I think, yeah.
I understand the
recommended-
practicality.
It's the slippery slope
And
we're
this is a,
creating.
right, this is a special circumstance, however, we always have to think, is someone else going to say, I'm just
That's-
not gonna do the Title
that's
V, and I'm gonna transfer
I'd
the
say the
property, and then
homeowner's
something
gonna be
else.
Very resistant. She just wants to get it, she's got the contract
Yeah.
signed and ready to go.
No, we understand.
I get that,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I can't see that she's not gonna wanna spend $600 to $800 to do that.
Yeah.
But
We can
that's
call the
like
state and ask if
No, no,
you
what I
can
would say
and
is,
then it's a failing though on the part of her legal counsel.
no, but
Who
I,
did not notice that there was not a Title V,
Right.
and yet
Yeah.
we're being asked to
Transfer.
vary
But-
something, and I can't at the moment think of what is the slippery slope and what is this gonna lead to, but it might.
so
And
I would say I think that's for us to consider, not to react. Like, what I would say is, when I look at the slippery slope, anybody who wants to replace a cesspool, I'm deeply enthusiastic
Yes.
about it because I think that it's entirely not in keeping. And if we do things that prolong the presence of the cesspool, we are not making the town safer.
So our qualifier on this would be, it's a cesspool.
I think it's that it's,
So
I think
if
it's
other
not-
people
right.
miss doing the Title V, not
Well,
that
they-
we're going to advocate for that, because
No, people
it's
need to do-
violating
I
state
think we're reacting to the
regulations.
specific piece of this is 6 months after the transfer of property. I think there's an active plan to implement this, the installation of a compliance system within, it sounds like 30 days, 60 days, something like that. You know, I think that's the piece that we'd say, there's a very concrete plan, not an abstract, like, no, the engineer will totally be back next week, I promise. Like, there's a real
Well, we
plan.
could,
Do
we
we wanna
could
make it-
make a more accelerated schedule too, to sort of compensate for
Yeah,
the
that's
fact
what I
that
was
it
going to
didn't
say,
follow.
is if this does not take place.
So we can say within a
or
year
get
the
started
transfer
with
date?
that X amount of time,
6 months.
then we're going to want a Title V.
This is the only thing we're gonna.
Yeah. So what do we want to give for the timeline for, if it's not done?
So when was
do
the
you think?
transfer?
July.
July.
So it's been,
And I don't believe there was a Title V, she didn't worry about the buyer.
Because she's like, this
Because
is
she
failed, I'm
already
gonna
had
replace it.
there was already a plan in place.
Yeah.
so we're going on to the 8th month since.
Right, so
But
they
keep
need
in
to
mind-
do,
transfer.
they
Keep
should
in
do
mind,
it.
It takes the time to go through Sherborn because we have to go through Conservation and Board of Health, the timing of it.
No, but I think
No,
the
but,
question is like, when can-
no,
They knew.
I'm
when can
just,
she get it installed?
Right.
Like, if we give you the green light today.
If we say
She's gonna
until
wait for the-
July
She's got a
1st,
signed contract with the installer.
I think that's fair. Let's make it a year from when the transfer occurs.
So
So it
it's
has to be.
by July 1st,
Yep.
things have to start.
All right.
It
I
was
think that's-
approved in August, just so
Yeah.
the board knows.
No, I get it, but then we pulled it back and now they're like, we finally made it and now we're trying to navigate.
So now we're-
I think within a year, the transfer, and it's
Yeah.
also, I'm not as worried about the slippery slope too, because it was sold before the cesspool regulation went into effect, which is not gonna be the case for anybody going forward. So it was in a little bit of a nether
No, that's
world.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that address all the concerns?
That's my
Appreciate your-
post-facto
Yeah,
rationale.
But it is true that
Perfect.
All
So,
right, did we
they,
make a vote
they
yet?
knew they
No.
needed to do
No,
that.
okay. So
So
do
the
we
legal
have,
counsel really should be consulted.
oh, I don't think so. I mean, we asked for
For
guidance from the
guidance.
state.
I know, I feel pretty
Or
comfortable with this.
reminded, yeah, no, that's fine.
Oh, they're saying theirs?
Board
Yeah,
can
I'm saying
revisit it
they should be
Theirs.
reminded
in
that,
July if it's not.
Not talking about us.
Can
We're not
revisit.
talking about us, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Make
Wasn't
that
they
as your
come to
motion.
us and ask us
To
what we should
revisit
do
it
6 months ago.
install
okay.
on such and such date.
Now we're falling behind. All right, so, do we have a motion to approve the plans subject to receipt of something? Is there
Deed
something?
recording for the garbage disposal,
Garbage,
which was
okay.
not designed
Not
in
for the
this.
garbage disposal, it was designed for garbage
sorry,
disposal,
no.
for the DEP notice of alternative
Yes,
systems.
the IA technology.
Okay, thank you. And also,
Are we gonna condition it upon installation and within 1 year from?
it
Or
almost
by
seems
July
like a
2020?
separate thing. Can we tie it to this neatly, or should we just have a?
I think,
You can make it a condition.
I think it's
Okay.
a fair condition that we're
Okay.
approving it
Yeah.
based on the predication that the
That's
system will be installed by July 2020.
And if not, the Title V will then be required.
Yes. Okay, great.
I think
So
that's fair.
moved.
Second, can I second my own motion?
He did it.
Oh, great. No.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Okay. Okay, so Marion? We'll be talking about the open space subdivision bylaw, planning board rules for open space subdivisions. And so I'll let you present, but just before that, I have had the file open to make the amendments that I mentioned to you I would be reinserting some details to be covered by planning board until Board of Health has an opportunity to revise its regulations, but coronavirus has been
Beyond what-
keeping us all very busy.
Oh, I
And
understand.
honestly, I tried so many times to do it, and the phone would ring, and that would be the end of it. So I will get that to you. I have it all identified. I have the language that I had before. I just need to put it in your current one. But we could
Great.
also talk about it with the
Oh,
board.
thank you for that. You've heard about this bylaw before. I mean, I have a presentation set up next door for advisory, and who knows when I'll get on the agenda there, because it's dragging out for a long time. So my computer's set up over there, but I don't think I have to go through.
I appreciate the implication that Board of Health is a lickety-split one. That's a good sign. You're not getting that a lot.
Well, you make the wise move of assigning a time. So I won't run through the whole bylaw. I know you've got it, I think, in your packet. Is that true? Okay. But you know what the major elements are. I can summarize them for you really quickly. The idea is that, and it's changed from 2 years ago, so we're starting fresh. We've done a lot of work on this. We've worked with Daryl, with Mark, with David. We've worked with Concom, and what we're trying to do is make a bylaw that everyone is happy with and that we can all get behind. And we think it's worth it because there's so much pressure on private properties in Sherborn from developers that we feel, even though there haven't been subdivision developments lately, in fact, we have 25 subdivisions in this town. It's surprising. The great majority were done by 1971. Since then, there's only been a couple, maybe 3. But times are changing. So we know that we have to be ready if a developer comes along with a subdivision proposal. Until very recently, we, the planning board, were assuming that because state law allows subdivisions by right, that we were assuming that they meant conventional subdivisions by right. But in the last few weeks, I've looked into it in a lot more detail, looked at other towns, talked to land use lawyers, and it's true that state law requires a town to allow subdivisions by right, but they don't state what kind of subdivision. So many towns are changing their bylaws to require that all subdivisions that are done by right have to be open space subdivisions with the majority of the land preserved as open space. And so that's what we're doing. In other towns, they're making conventional subdivisions that consume the whole property a special permit. And the only way you can get a special permit for that is to prove that it's environmentally better than an open space subdivision would have been on the same property. So that's why we're bringing this back, and we really think it's important to get it passed at this town meeting. And we've done a lot of work on it. We've simplified it a lot. Many of the kind of special permit possibilities, like transfer of development rights, multifamily, are out. We simplified it down to single-family homes on 40% of the land, and a lot of, frontage and setback requirements have been changed to protect abutters and to protect the scenic roads. And we've played it out on a test property that I have set up in the other room. So
What does that mean?
that is, we've taken a test property and said it's a subdivision. The subdivision you've seen before, it's the Parks Drive, Jackson Road subdivision, which is a good example because there's wetlands and there's a lot of typical Sherborn things. It has no access to open space, incidentally, but in playing out what that would have been as an open space subdivision, we've used that as a test. And it turns out that on that property, you could have the same number of houses on 40% of the property, and they would still be about an acre in size. So you have a lot of leeway there. So I think the big change is now that open space is by right, we've made the bylaw a lot friendlier. And I should point out that most of the controls, many of the other controls on subdivisions are actually in the planning board rules and regulations, not in the bylaws. The bylaws deal just with dimensions, types of houses, uses of space, and land use, basically. But the rules and regulations are what really counts when a developer comes in to do a subdivision. And so we've spent a lot of time, in fact, most of the last several months, revising our entire rules and regulations for subdivisions to make them all much more environmentally friendly, and to make sure that if an open space subdivision proposal comes in, that the planning board has the authority, consulting with you, Board of Health and Concom, to dictate where the developed portion is going to be and where the open space portion is going to be. So we've added a section right in the beginning, and you'll see that in this kind of handout of important pages. I knew you didn't want to see all 44 pages, so I pulled out the important ones. And on page 6, you can see that we give a lot of attention to section 3.1, preliminary conference. We give a lot of attention to the process of a preliminary conference in which the planning board and the developer would work together, hopefully, or if not together, they would have to work together to lay out the basic outlines of the subdivision. Where's the development going to be? It would have to be in the best spot for groundwater protection, basically, and for wetland protection. And then where are the best areas that need to be absolutely conserved for environmental purposes, and that would include not only wetlands, but other sensitive areas where maybe you may know of underground flows or streams or adjacent open space that's important to connect, things like that. So that's one big change. We've paid a lot more attention to groundwater protection. As you can see, I know you don't have time to read it now, but as you go through this, notice all the text in red is new text, and the groundwater impact statements and assessments have been done in collaboration with Board of Health and Concom up to now, and we're happy to continue to collaborate, because while the bylaw is going to town meeting and has to be passed by 2/3 vote, the rules and regs we do it only takes a hearing, announced 2 weeks in advance. So we still can continue to tweak this. Just so you know, we'd like to continue to work on this. But we would like to be able to go to town meeting and be able to say that we've worked with Board of Health and we think that we've built in whatever protections the planning board can build in.
And could I just give the board a little background? So,
Yeah.
Marion and I have met several times on this and talked about it, and we had talked that this was going to be something to be, have features added to it that you can see now in the document. But I knew that there was a preference of the planning board that as much of, for the things that talked about septic, design, and performance, that really should be in Board of Health regulations. But because of this new approach that we really hadn't anticipated fully when we prepared our last revisions, I didn't feel that we were quite there for what we would need to cover this. Plus, we had the advantage of seeing what Carlisle had done for their regulations, and they just had the idea of also having mod flow, whereas we said do an area of impact analysis. They also had mod flow, which is three-dimensional analysis versus the AOI. And the language is there. It's a nice thing to reference. And so I think that'd be good for us to have in ours as an option, but we're not there yet. So when I first, made the revisions that point to our requirements for the environmental health impact report, so they're backing that up in this regulation by saying it's also required. But this is where we might want to, for some period of time, add the mod flow as either the preferred or an option. I don't know, Elisa, what you see in terms of it being a very standard kind of analysis at this point. I don't think it's unusual.
Very standard.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it would be preferred over than
Well,
doing
that's
AOI
what I was going
or
to say,
not. I'm not-
that I typically don't like to be super prescriptive, telling people you can only use this model because there's new models that are being
Right.
developed. So, you can say such as,
which is,
and
yeah.
that way you're not telling people.
Because right now, we refer to the,
There's a better model you're using.
Yeah, too bad, right. So I think as long as there's that kind of flexibility, Daryl. And so would that go in this design section where it's talking about for septic systems with a design capacity?
yes, yes. And again, it's pointing back to our 3-point, I forget which one, and unfortunately, I left my entire set of notes at home, but, so that would be one addition, and then the other thing that Carlisle had in their regulation, this will involve the Board of Health discussing and evaluating, but they set a standard for what would be the quality of water expected at a boundary, a property boundary. And so that seemed like a very nice way to define what the issues were, and that, and it's consistent with other parts of Title V regulations, but not identical too. So that also we could have, and we had it in and out and in and out, and it needs to be back in there.
Yeah, I see it right now.
Well,
Yeah. There's some reference to some degree, but there was a little more guidance provided in the Carlisle version. And then I think at one point we had talked briefly at a meeting here about, what we might have. So, that, I'm just letting you know, those are two pieces I assume I'll put back in because of the speed with which you can adopt this. Given what's come up for us recently, our attention is going to be diverted elsewhere for a while, most likely, so.
Right, yeah, I appreciate that. And believe me, we're happy to put whatever language works in here, but we can't set strict standards that you guys haven't set because we don't have the legal authority to do that, such as we can, I can tell you what we do say. We do refer to the possibility that there may be larger septic designs here. But the planning board will support determinations of the Board of Health and/or Conservation Commission to require whatever it is you decide. That is, we can't be the jurisdictional body on those things, but we can make it very clear that we refer to your judgment on this and give examples. With that,
And having the EHIR backed up is a huge part of that. That's why we have that. Those are for systems just so people know, other than a single-family home on a single lot.
right.
And even in that, we right now have a somewhat generous threshold for those analyses
Yeah.
pegged against some requirements that
I
DEP
know that-
has, starting at 2,000 gallons, but
Right.
per day.
I know there's been worry about large septic systems or septic systems being clustered along with clustered houses, and that's something that we have to take into account. There are certain designs that won't pass because the septic systems are too close together. And there are other designs that will. I mean, not every, just because it's by right, doesn't mean that the developer can lay it out any way he wants.
I think the section, Daryl, that we talked about at this meeting with Marion was in 3.3.6 under Groundwater Impact Assessment C, which is projection of increases in nutrient and contaminant loading resulting from subdivision septic systems collectively at well sites within the subdivision, at abutter property lines, at wetlands, blah, blah, blah. And this talks about that projections need to be made, but it doesn't tie them to that they need to ensure the quality levels at the boundary, and that's something that we had discussed. So I think, along the lines of what Daryl was saying, I think we need to tie this back. We do have groundwater quality regulations in effect, so I think tying it back at the abutter boundary, we need to ensure that there's not going to be a violation of the standard. So this talks about you have to figure out the projections, but then it's missing the second piece of, well, how good is, and then what? So I think that, Daryl, is probably where we should.
No, that's what I was thinking, that we would either say.
Does that make sense, Marion?
Well, not quite. I'm not sure I totally understand.
But
We
I think
don't
we're saying
want that,
With this regulation, it could say, it's gonna be terrible. Like, it doesn't introduce a standard that it has to be.
Yeah, so-
It just says you have to know what it's gonna look like. And if they said it's gonna look like toxic waste, that would satisfy this regulation because it's not referencing a
Right.
standard quality.
So all I'm saying is let's link it
I get
to
it.
groundwater quality regulations that exist. There's nothing wrong with that because it's at the abutter line, because we need to protect the abutter's
Yeah.
groundwater quality.
Yeah.
so
No, I
what
totally appreciate
Carlisle
that.
did was use nitrogen. So here, I'll
As a
just tell you the
surrogate.
two things. They said 5 milligrams per
Yeah, I
liter,
think
which
that's
is
in
half. Oh, is that still in there?
I think it's,
Yeah,
I think I
it's
saw
always
that.
been in our regulations.
Okay, great.
So it's
Okay.
still there.
Okay, good.
And,
Yeah, we had talked
you know, I
about
didn't
that a
even know
long
we-
time ago, and then I think the qualifier I wanted to add that I took out, you did add, I don't remember anymore, it's only been a few weeks, was to reference that that can't be the level post-application of nitrogen reduction technology, because that level is merely meant to be representative of all the contaminants that might be in the wastewater, so you don't want it, you
Yeah,
don't
it's a
want to be
surrogate.
reducing that, and then
Yeah, I think
everything
that's
else is still
understood.
continuing at full force, so that's the
Okay, good.
qualifier for that.
So,
Because that-
you know, given all that you've had to do just lately, I mean, it's really, public health with the coronavirus is sort of thrown into what I hope is an overblown panic, but it may not be, so we have to be ready. And I understand you're dealing with that. My hope is that when we take the bylaw, not the regs, but the bylaw to town meeting, and explain to the town that we're working with you to get the regs, you know, exactly right. We're not bringing the regs, we're just trusting that we'll work with you, that we won't get negative comments about things that we can't anticipate at town meetings, at least from you guys. So if you have any suggestions about the language of the bylaw, you know, please tell us now. And we appreciate that, because you've already helped a lot. Makes it much better, so, thank you.
Marion, I don't know if this would be helpful. She has a lot of data from Maynard. And I don't know if Maynard has a public water supply or not. May not be comparable.
Maynard.
I don't, actually.
I thought you had data on the quantity of these clustered housing developments in Maynard. Was it Maynard?
No, Westford, not Maynard.
Westford?
Yeah, Westford.
So I'm just wondering if that would be another town that would be useful to them. If you know of a number of towns that have used this design.
Yeah,
I worry a
there's,
little bit that as we get closer to time, the degree to, like, it feels like we're sort of at the tweak sentences, light adjustments phase of things, as opposed to, here's new data, here's a new substantive change. Like, am I kind of reading the room right in terms of what the timeline is?
yes, the timeline is tight,
Yeah.
When's
So
town
it's
meeting?
sort of.
for the bylaw,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
But,
think
yeah,
you
but when
bylaw,
I'm
I mean,
talking,
Regulations, that
Yeah,
makes
from what
sense.
you're trying to do.
Yeah.
right, there are several towns that do have water and, wells and septics.
Yes.
Shutesbury is one that has passed this bylaw. I think they don't yet have enough of a history, but that is something I should look into more, see if they've had any,
So I guess the board.
Open
says
space
that
subdivisions
it has
built.
Significant concerns that have not yet been raised or addressed. Does that sound?
Yeah.
No, and what you're saying, I've already made it.
Yeah. No, but I
So,
think to your question of, are we good? It sounds like we're sort of, it looks pretty good, not totally totally done, but from a broad stroke standpoint, it sounds like there's no outstanding
And
issues.
there's
I
a
have a
difference
question,
between the
though.
bylaws and the regulations.
Yeah,
I have
that-
a question, because when land is put into, the land which is which is not used, open space, is that put into some sort of a restriction for development?
Oh, yes, it's permanently protected, and we've spelled that all
Or
out.
is there a number of years attached to that, or?
No, it's permanent. At least as permanent can be.
It's pretty permanent.
That's pretty permanent.
And then this, anyway, we can only comment on this meeting.
Oh, as opposed to.
Yeah, and but that's the
I was just
regulations.
scanning through the whole
Oh,
thing.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Bylaw.
Right now,
No, we're
what,
here, are we talking?
the issue that we want to be able to put to bed as soon as possible is the bylaw itself.
Right.
Because,
Which is
you
this.
know, we
So-
still need to tweak
Not the-
regulations a bit, but we don't want to throw out the baby with the bath, because I think we don't know what's coming down the pike. According to Gino, he's had inquiries about this bylaw from developers. And so it seems to me, knowing that and knowing the properties that are kind of in play right now, it's good to get this, in place now and worry about the details later.
So, I'm sure you're aware, if you've been reviewing all these regulations over time, that all the zoning is established based on all these principles to ensure safe drinking water and groundwater, protection. But there's a lot of discussion at the state level of emerging contaminants. And as Daryl had mentioned, when even larger septic systems are only capable of removing nitrogen, nitrates and other things, but not yet even addressing any of the emerging contaminants.
I'm well aware, and
Yeah,
I've
so-
heard it at this board many times.
Well, that can go in the regulations, so that's,
Right.
Yeah,
so
and
that's-
that's a problem for all of our septic
Yeah, right.
systems. It's not specific to this bylaw.
No, I understand, but
Yeah.
that just becomes more challenging
But I would also say.
for the Board of Health when the zoning is,
Sure.
is there
But
going
that's
to
not,
be,
that's not rendered any worse by
No,
this.
it's not.
is there a ratio recommended when this would be incurred? In other words, if a property is only big enough to support,
If the property is big enough for a subdivision, this would apply.
right, but what's the definition for that?
Of a subdivision?
When it's big enough for a subdivision?
Well, if it's big enough to be subdivided with a new road, by definition, a subdivision involves the building of a new road, creating new frontage. That's the definition, the state definition of subdivision. If you have, say, a big property along a road and there's plenty of frontage, then zoning laws apply, and that's called an A&R, an approval not required. You just can divide up the property. But if you're creating new lots by building a new road into a property that's big enough to do that, then that's a subdivision. And this would apply.
And
So
I-
I don't know what the,
I think what you're getting at is in an area that might have 10 houses without a subdivision, will the subdivision allow it to have 100 houses? Is that the general
Yes.
gist?
Okay.
And then,
Also-
but no, I'm just saying, I think that's more the question is it going to
it's going to be
create
an
a
efficient
wholly
way
different
to
number
bypass
of
the
homes?
fence.
Oh, no.
But people could subdivide now, and we're saying we're creating a pathway for you to be able to subdivide, default into open space, and you to articulate a greater rationale for a conventional subdivision.
For example, is there in the 44 pages somewhere a recommendation that the subdivision would only involve 10% of the parcel?
There's all kinds of stipulations.
In the
About
bylaw,
open
that's in the
space,
bylaw.
60% has to
Well,
be.
that was the question.
It's
all-
for,
all
yeah,
right in the bylaw.
Okay, I just haven't. read it.
housing and roads and development and disturbance would have to be on 40% of the parcel,
40%.
no matter what size the parcel is. And,
60%.
yeah. And
And
the
the
number
number
of houses would be restricted. It couldn't possibly be more than a conventional subdivision, and probably would be less,
You're
because,
restricting the area.
you do the math a different way, and you can read it in the bylaw, I won't go through it.
Yeah, but that, how did you come to 40%?
I would say I think we're getting out of
Yeah,
scope for the
yeah.
questions for Board of Health.
Well, no, it's not out of scope at all for Board of Health, because the zoning of 2.5 acres is set based on the principles of protecting water.
Yeah, but,
So if we're,
but there's performance standards in here already, so you should probably read it more thoroughly.
Yeah, read the
but-
bylaw, and then I'm happy to talk to you about it,
okay.
if you have questions. Okay? Thank you.
Any other? Okay,
Thanks.
sounds good. So as soon
Sounds
as I
good.
can, I will
Well, I look forward to
do those few
getting it.
more little tweaks.
As long as I know that we can tell town meeting that we're working together, that's just fine.
Okay,
Okay.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was clearly reading the difference of using mark.
You know the date?
Yeah, I read something else.
No, I just read the ends of these are long.
Warren hasn't even come out.
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I could look it up faster.
When, town meeting.
These, like,
No,
we could just discuss.
I just asked him
Yeah.
if he knew when town meeting.
I don't think you
I'm
do,
watching
you
your
might know,
fingers.
but.
Okay, so,
So I'm gonna squeeze in 5 minutes.
okay, we're
just
gonna
said
talk
something
about
about
5 minutes
the
on
food
food
inspections.
Okay,
Does
awesome.
anyone have any comments that they'd like to make in particular?
So
I'll
it seemed
just-
like there were a couple of,
I think I was reading table 15, which had no issues, and I think this had all had issues.
yeah, these had issues, so, but she stipulated a time period by which they had to be rectified, so.
Yes.
I mean, he. So I presume he's gonna just ensure
He
that that's the
is-
case.
And he's
Excellent to
indicated
work
a
with.
Oh,
date.
good.
Excellent.
That's why we
The only
hired
thing
him.
we'll have to decide is what constitutes a reinspection versus a follow-up in
It's the
terms of
fee.
fee, right?
Sorry,
Because
can't find it.
re-inspections have a fee, but kind of follow-up of,
Yeah.
there's a,
We've never collected a re-inspection fee,
Yeah.
ever.
okay.
So
So,
he will charge
yeah,
for his
right, for his time,
hourly
right,
rate.
he needs to do that.
But we won't.
I mean, I would think if it becomes a lot, then,
Okay, then, and actually let him know that
yeah.
for folks who aren't making progress or there's some
Right.
other
Well, he would
issue.
bring that to you.
Yeah, then,
Yeah,
yeah, okay. And then we can talk about the fee, cross that bridge.
correct.
So, I mean, some of the details look good here, and section of code, I could see where this takes longer than the old forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more detail. Makes me think a little bit.
And I will also need to buy more inspection reports.
So the one question I had was about that, for the tobacco signage, so I guess he asked Alex to remove the CBD materials.
He has followed up by email to Alex. He copies me on them. He has provided the signage,
Signage, okay.
or links to the signage.
Okay.
And that Alex can print them off. and,
Yeah, I was wondering about the.
He provided the law, the state law about the CBD.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where that fell, because I've seen a lot of, like, mini marts, just all around
Yeah, it's
selling
against
it.
the law to sell any edible
But it's a s-
CBD product.
Even though it's
further
not
to-
marijuana.
Because it's considered a drug, and it's not considered a food substance, so the Department of Agriculture sent out a notice about 6 months ago
Okay.
telling us that, yeah, you can sell it as a ointment,
cream?
a
Yeah,
cream, but you
okay,
can't
so
sell it as an edible.
ingestible, okay.
Because it's not approved yet as a food substance. and
I see.
You can't put a drug
So
in
can
a food
anybody,
substance.
like a dispensary could sell it, probably?
That I'm not for sure. I don't think they can. They're,
Really?
I mean, they can sell edibles, they can't sell.
CBD.
Like, they're just,
They
they're
can
not
sell
like
No, they
that.
can, they can sell CBD, I know they
Yeah.
can.
I mean, I think if you could sell marijuana, you should be.
I'm just
okay.
I
saying.
think
I'm
they
just
can sell
saying, I know that.
marijuana edibles, but I don't think they can sell CBD.
No, they do.
Oh, they do? Okay, I don't know.
Perfect. There's no better way to say that.
Sorry. I thought no one could sell it, but.
Okay, so we note receipt of
Thanks for the
But I just
update.
wanted, I wasn't clear.
Clearly, he's
Like,
scheduled follow-ups already,
Right.
so.
Is this his first
That's it.
step with
Yeah.
us?
But it creates
That's
a
cool.
lot.
All right.
CPD on it, 306.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So here we've got Dr. Drummond's here to discuss the warrant article. I think the one ask is we still have a vigorous agenda, so we're hoping that we can be on the briefer side in the sort of 15 to 20 minute range. Does that sound realistic to you?
Yes, I will be
And-
succinct.
And Ellen had sent out the slides that you had, so
Yeah,
we've had a chance to see that. so.
One, beautiful color copies if you would like.
Now you're just showing off.
Matt, I thought we were going to also make the clarification that we're not going to be voting on anything. This is for informational purposes only.
I guess I sit in
Oh.
the chair?
Yeah.
That way you are on prime time.
And-
Okay.
And at the end, I'll give these back to you, unless you want one, but, well, maybe not.
Well, I think we had them
So
in
that
black
you
and
can
white.
pass them out to others. I don't need mine. All right, well, never mind.
Okay.
The other thing I need to say, because there had been some communications that were naming specific people in town related to, oh, that's the other, that's
No, no,
the
that's
COVID,
resolved.
yeah.
Yep.
All right, so that's, yeah, never mind.
Move-
But-
Okay.
But if we flow right into any kind of COVID discussion, and I
No,
forget to mention that.
No names, no names.
No names, no
Yes.
no nothing. okay?
Absolutely,
All right,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
That is confidential information
Understood.
from the Board of Health's perspective.
Okay. So what I wanted to discuss with you in a succinct way are the implications of the proposal to flip high school and elementary school start times for public health and road safety. And as you know, that this is coming up in a warrant article that is specifically about authorizing a traffic and safety study, but it's also a broader issue that impacts safety. And maybe to frame the issue, discuss briefly why there's a Board of Health interest in the issue, and then describe some of the health implications of the proposal. The issue.
Okay, and just quickly, I'll mention that the start times for schools has been a topic of discussion in town and at the regional level for many years.
Yes.
And has been studied by a variety of things, so I think many of us are familiar. We have some background in that
Okay.
because the town has been, and many towns have been wrestling with this for quite some time.
Well, that will help me to keep this brief. And I needn't go into the details, except to say that now the little ones are going to go early and the older ones will go later, rather than the older ones going later and the younger ones going early. And there's no issue with delaying the high school start time. In fact, I think it's a great idea. There's tremendous evidence to support that adolescents are sleep deprived, and that has negative consequences for them. When the discussion started, that was about all the information that there was. There was very little information on the implications of early start times for little ones. But now there is. And as it turns out, it's not good for them either. And so, in a brief nutshell, I'll go through some details. What we're interested in is seeing that to maintain the later start time for the high school, but also make it so that none of the children are starting school before about 8:30 in the morning. What's interesting is that next is the jurisdictional issue. Why is this a Board of Health issue? When you actually read the material on the website and the material that was expressed by the school committee, there was actually not a there was no real educational justification for it. The justification was a public health justification. To give you just an example, the option to do nothing was deemed untenable based on the severity of the present public health crisis precipitated by adolescent sleep deprivation. So it's been framed squarely in terms of a health and to some degree safety, but primarily a health issue. So I think it is within the jurisdiction of the Board of Health to partner with the school committee. Not that you take it over in any way, but that it is appropriate that this was a health justification, and therefore, even according to the Massachusetts Department of Health guidelines for health in the schools, this is expected to be a partnership between boards of health and school committees. I will skip the justification for why it's a good thing for adolescents, because it sounds like you have heard that, and I think there's consensus. Nobody disagrees about that. I'm also not going to go into tremendous detail about the medical experts who were consulted.
And the medical experts who were consulted were solidly in favor of delaying school start times for older children. But what hasn't been noted so much is they actually made quite strong statements in some cases about either lack of knowledge or even about harmful effects of moving elementary school start times earlier. And those haven't been as widely discussed, but they're a matter of record. Dr. Eric Zhao discussed, he said, in terms of what the effect might be on the younger children, there's a ton we don't know. The data points are too small and too different to be instructive. And you talk about how hard it is to study, but Judith Owens, who's probably the leading expert on this area, was actually much more explicit about this. She was asked by a Holliston parent, I'm curious about the anticipated cumulative effects of this new school schedule. Even with a bedtime of 7:30, students will lose an hour of sleep each night. Can you please explain the cumulative effects of this significant amount of loss of sleep? And Dr. Owens' reply was, I can't answer that question. I would encourage you as a community to look at what happens over time. It's a natural experiment. I don't know an answer to your question. Your kids are going to get an average an hour less sleep. You're going to have to take a look as a district. You're going to have to, as a district, take a hard look at those issues. And she went on, it's likely to have an effect on mood, behavior, and may also have effects on academic performance. We don't know what long-term effects there might be. We don't know, yes, there's evidence even in younger children, even in toddlers, that show an increased risk for obesity. Would you agree that it could be a long-term effect, was the next question. That certainly could be a long-term effect. So even as this was being discussed, even with the knowledge at the time, there was acknowledgement that there may be harms to the younger children by moving their school start times earlier. And since then, and these were things that the committees that considered this couldn't have known because the research hadn't been done at the time, following the impact of the research on adolescents, there now is research on what the impact is on younger children. And I point to a study that was published in January 2020, so published basically 2 months ago. So this is very recent. This one actually comes from Portugal. And it was an epidemiological study of sleep-wake timing in school children 4 to 11 years old. So all of them little ones. And what they found was the hallmark of sleep deprivation that you see in the older kids, and that is, during the school week, they sleep less than they do on the weekends when they can sleep as much as their bodies are telling them to. So it's an indication that early school start times do sort of objectively result in sleep deprivation for small children as well as young ones. In the interest of time, there are several other studies that all show the same thing. And since we're going fast, I don't think we need to go into each of them. So maybe I would then just skip ahead to saying, to answer the question, so what? What does it matter if kids are sleep deprived? Is it just a matter of having a cranky kid? And as it turns out, it actually does matter more. There are clear associations now between sleep deprivation and obesity in childhood. Obesity is emerging. It didn't used to be a childhood problem. It is now. And to quote a leading researcher on this, Alison Miller, she basically said that when you look at the causes of obesity in young children, sleep deprivation and shifted sleep styles, sleep timings are part of it. There's also now a link that's been established between early childhood sleep deprivation and metabolic disorders that are either precursors of or can actually turn out to be type 2 diabetes mellitus in children. And just quoting from this fellow Dutil, says, although type 2 diabetes diagnosis in children is quickly becoming one of the most important public health concerns, it is also apparent that children's sleep duration, quality, and sleep-wake time schedule is becoming part of the issue. And we actually communicated with, this one's from Dr. Chaput, who wrote more on the diabetes. And we asked the question, what do you think about later school start times, say 8:30 for all children, including elementary students? And he replied, I fully agree with you that elementary school students should not start earlier than 8:30 a.m., not only teenagers. Your interpretation of the evidence is correct. And school-age children also need more sleep than teenagers. 9 to 11 hours versus 8 to 10 hours. So if they have to wake up earlier than teenagers, then it'll be extremely difficult to sleep at least 9 hours per night. The adverse effects of sleep deprivation are certainly the same across the life cycle, not good for anyone. I'll just make a few more comments on this. You know, what you really see with the children, this certainly wasn't true when I was growing up, but now parents also have to work late. So if the kids are getting up to catch a bus before, say, 7 in the morning, unlike a lot of us who are able to leave school and, at 2 o'clock and come home, now they can't because their parents have to work late. And so they get home at 6 p.m. or later. They're actually now waiting for the school bus 11 to 12 hours a day. There just isn't enough, there aren't enough hours in the day to do that, have dinner with your family, spend a little time with your parents, and go to bed. And so having the school start time so early actually, combined with the late work times that now both parents often have to have, makes a situation that is just neither socially nor medically healthy for kids. The other key thing about this, and I should mention that this is explicitly a role of the Board of Public Health, because one of the explicit issues the Department of Public Health has said that boards of health and schools should collaborate on is prevention of childhood overweight and obesity. So this is specifically called out as an area that calls for collaboration between these two town agencies. The other thing that I'd mention is that with buses now coming before, or will be coming before 6 a.m., this means that during the winter months,
Excuse me?
before 7 a.m., not 6 a.m., that'd be really bad. Before 7 a.m., during the winter months, kids are actually out on the streets in the dark. And between, children's known impulsiveness, and also evidence that they actually don't have the perceptual ability to judge speeds of cars, to know how to get out in front of them, they're at high risk. And in fact, being hit by a car is the third leading cause of death for children 5 to 9 years old. In fact, and this one darkly, but we had a child hit in Holliston just 5 days ago. I mean, so this is an ongoing health problem, and now having these kids out so early waiting for the bus creates a real risk to them. And not only that, because parents don't want their kids out so early, many more of them are going to be driving their kids to school, and now that increases congestion problems, which are not your problem, except in one case, and that is that the school, Pine Hill School, is the emergency shelter for the town, which is in your purview, and already it's actually very difficult to get cars up and down. It's frequently so jammed that you can't get cars in and out. So this will have ongoing implications that are mostly traffic and not your purview, but to the degree that they do impact the ability to use the school as a shelter with reasonable egress, the problem that has been there for a while is now exacerbated by the change in school start times. So I think I would just wrap up by saying that we do have a proposal, and the proposal or the request is that the Board of Health draft a memo and issue a statement supporting start times that allow both elementary and secondary school students to get a healthy amount of sleep with no students needing to wait for the bus on dark streets. And I think the school committee and officials were right to propose to delay school start times for the high school and middle school. But I think the same logic actually applies to the young ones as well. It is true that some of these effects may peak during adolescence, but it's clear that they start much, much earlier, and they can have significant long-term impact.
I would love to kind of propose, just in terms of managing time, that maybe 5 minutes of discussion for us. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, as long as we each get
Yeah.
a chance to
So-
articulate.
Yeah.
I just want to ask one question.
Well, I think
Yeah.
each one of us probably has some things to
Yeah.
say.
So, but I'd say, for me, really, I'm a process guy, and so we kind of have the select board here, we've got us here, and I think all of us have times where our jurisdictions touch each other. And so for me, as I kind of looked at the data and thought about it, is there a burning platform that means that work that's already been done by a board in town is something that we should opine on or sort of insert ourselves into? And I can't speak on behalf of the board, but for me, that was kind of the framework I was thinking about. And as I looked at the data here, I think there are issues that are raised that are worthwhile, worth thinking about, worth being considered. it's not clear to me that it represented this is the burning platform. Although I think they're important issues, is this massively different than things that were considered at the time that the school was making the decisions? It didn't feel like it. And then as I went through the January paper, I think, what is it, Inez and Clara?
Yeah.
The Inez Clara, there were a couple of comments I thought were also, helpful. So I think one comment they have in their discussion section on page 58 is a great percentage of Portuguese school children sleep less than the recommended number of hours on school days because of late bedtimes. And so I think there's a tension here, and I think what they're really describing is changes in sleep patterns, but the causation versus correlation, this was descriptive. And it was also sort of saying there's lots of different factors that go into it. I think it answers the question to say there's an evolving pattern of sleep that commences in early childhood and progresses through adolescence and into young adulthood. And if we then track that over lifetime, there's probably lots of different sleep patterns that vary. But to me, it didn't feel like it hit the kind of burning platform, new data. This is really compelling stuff. The same way that as we go back to the COVID piece, if you say there is community transmission, that is a burning platform that drives a different set of choices than there is no community transmission. And for me, thinking about this, it didn't hit that for me. And so I'd sort of be reticent to then say another board has looked at it and thought about it. I'm going to sort of restart that discussion, particularly since things like budget and other implications of it are out of my purview. So I think that's it for me, just for my comments. I don't know how we.
We can just go down the line.
Perfect. Yeah,
So
Chair, what are your thoughts?
I actually agree, this isn't working, but I actually agree that the public health issue is probably going to turn out to be beneficial for everybody. But I can't produce that data yet because it's not available. But the questions that I have are, I'm sure there are logistical issues that the select board or whoever has been involved with the decisions have been addressing. So the school committee. The first question is, how much time are we talking about? Because, and I'm not familiar with what the pre-existing
I think it's actually
schedules
already
were.
been decided.
Yeah,
and voted on,
right,
and
and
for
so,
implementation.
Yes.
oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
you should, and.
Right,
it's
so
on the web.
I agree that there's some medical or public health value. It's too bad it's this far down the pike before it's come before us, because
But I don't know that that's totally, what I would
if
say
it's
is I
based on a
think-
health decision.
What I would say is, I don't think it's for us. I think that you're sort of raising a concern and saying when this was considered before, there was a positive data about early childhood impacts, and there's new data that you sort of wanted to highlight. I don't think that then means that there was no input from other stakeholders when this started several, multiple years ago, and I don't.
But they've never come before the Board of Health.
Right, but there's broad community engagement that included
And
lots of
they
people, and there's a-
included health
No, but
issues and experts.
all I'm
and
saying is, I'm
research.
sure that's true. But if they want the Board of Health to comment, it's too bad the Board of Health wasn't, as a board, asked to comment until it's already sort of a done deal, because then it's harder to have an influence if it's a true public health. If it's a true public health rationale, and the Board of Health would have been of value to the people involved in the discussion, it's kind of late. That's all I'm saying. It's too bad. But I'm sure people did comment who were knowledgeable, so I wasn't aware of all the factors.
There may be additional opportunities, because certainly other states and potentially this state may pass legislation at some point. There's legislation in consideration to say that all students need to start at 8:30 or later. So this issue is not unique here, and these considerations are not unique to this discussion here. There is growing evidence and and particularly as these plans get implemented, and we see the impact that they have on younger children. In fact, it is likely that there will be movements to do the same thing for elementary students that has been done for high school students. Because the problem is, we're not just keeping the little ones the same, we're actually moving in the wrong direction now for those kids. So I think it is appropriate, because the folks who are making these decisions are not physicians. I mean, they're or other health professionals.
But they're relying on experts.
I would just love to just pause for a second.
Yeah.
I totally jumped and made sure
Yeah,
that you
I mean,
but I'd love to kind of go through the rest of the board for comments.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely.
Yes, go ahead.
Because these far away.
A few things. One of them is that shifting the time doesn't necessarily lead to sleep deprivation. 9 to 11 hours, if a child, and I've my kids are college and post-college now, they went through the school system. I wish my high schoolers could have benefited from this policy, to be honest, but when they were younger, they were always up anyway, and they were tending to go to sleep earlier. They didn't have to do sports after school. They didn't have 5 hours of homework. So there was flexibility at which point you can still have dinner and have your kids go to bed 8:30, get up at 6:15, and they can still satisfy that amount of time. So I would say, first of all, I don't think that the shift necessarily leads to sleep deprivation. Secondly, the studies I found that were peer-reviewed, that had statistical significance, at the level that you would expect to see, they were largely correlational. They weren't causational, and they, were sort of less clear in terms of the consequences. So even if there perhaps is, I understand there could be a shift in the hours, and I understand what you're saying about, kids catching up then on the weekends a little bit, and you can see that lag. What is that translating into? And I can say both observationally and reading the plethora of literature for adolescents and teenagers, things like less attention when they're driving their cars. I mean, that's an absolute safety concern when your high schooler or your middle schooler has to stay up till 11 or midnight studying for exams or finishing their homework or a lab report, or 2 in the morning, and then having to get in a car, maybe even being your babysitter and driving, themselves or siblings. So that's a safety concern. I think also in terms of performance in school for middle schoolers and high schoolers, there is a clear change in the level of performance based on having these earlier start times and having the circadian rhythm that teenagers have. They can't go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night, even if they could, which they rarely could. So I think, the literature is, in my mind, more compelling at this point to say that the consequences of the sleep schedule and the school start times for middle schoolers and high schoolers are more dire and clearer and more explicit than they are. I'm not saying that these have no credibility, but it's a relative risk, and I'm a risk assessor. That's what I do. I have my MPH. That I look at risk and probability as for my living. And when you have a finite budget and you have resources for buses and drivers and insurance, you have to make decisions based on relative risks. And I think that's what the school committee did, is they weighed the relative risks, and I think they came to the right decision. If we had infinite money and infinite buses and could start all of them at the same time, I obviously would have a problem with that, but that's not really the world that we're living in. And I will add one last thing. When my younger, who's now a freshman in college, was in kindergarten, they took away full-day kindergarten as a funded option. And so they said, I was like, well, we both work, I need full-day kindergarten. My daughter had full-day, and they said, well, you can self-fund that. And so that's what we did, is we paid an extra couple grand a year. If you wanted your kid to go to full-day kindergarten, the school supplied the teacher, and we paid the money to fund that. So I'm just putting that out there as an option that maybe people would want to consider in terms of budgetary things going forward, that maybe if this is really something that the elementary people, school people feel strongly about, is exploring, are there options that maybe like what we did for kindergarten that could be done?
I wonder, I don't really want to get into a funding discussion because it's not a budget committee, but it's not clear that this is a cost-neutral proposal to move the elementary school start times earlier. Because what it does is it puts the elementary school traffic at the same time as the peak commuting traffic, at the same time as the train coming through. So there may be, and also putting the kids out on the street may lead to demands for lighting and sidewalks, et cetera, to make them safer. So it's not at all clear to me that the proposal to shift elementary school start times earlier actually is budget neutral. And there may be budget neutral ways to actually have both. If you actually just move the high schoolers 15 minutes later, you can get 2 rounds of buses in, and both the elementary school students and the high school students can actually then have start times at 8:30 or later. So I'm not, some of these issues may merit some more consideration.
Do you think most elementary school parents are sending their kids to wait for the bus by themselves, though? Because I can say I never did that. I mean, typically I thought it was even a requirement that there's someone waiting with children under 12. So.
I would expect most parents would wait with their kids by the.
Yeah, and that's what I always used to see when
Yeah.
I'd be commuting to work, is see everyone out with their children. So I don't think I ever saw, except for individual homes. Maybe some kids would stand at the end of the driveway by themselves, but then they'd be not on a street.
Not in this day and age.
Yeah, but I don't think, I think he was saying, I think it's the darkness, not.
Back then, but not now.
Yeah, but we were riding our bikes.
Yeah, but I interpreted
We had to walk
it as that he was saying it was
uphill
because
and
it's
stuff.
dark, not because they're
The
alone.
wolves.
Because they're children and they're impulsive and it's dark. No.
Anyway, but David, do you have any particular comments?
I
So,
have nothing to add.
right, I have similar comments to the others in that, and certainly on the trade-off, I think it would be much better. I only have my own child to go by, but when she was younger, she was up, didn't matter. I mean, she could have gone much earlier. She could have had that 6 a.m. start. So, but it was torture when she was in high school because she just, she was not inclined to go to bed. She knew the importance of sleep, and the homework is crushing as well. So, I would have been delighted if it could have been flipped. It would have fit in general with what her natural schedule was, but I don't know if she's unusual in that regard. And then just one other thing, I didn't have a chance to read all of the studies, but I was concerned that there was heavy emphasis on the one from Ken and whatever their, Gomes.
Claire and Gomez.
Yeah, Claire and Gomez. Only because I don't know about the influence of a culture that eats dinner much later. And so that is already pushing their bedtimes to later, which I don't think starting at 8, anywhere from 8 to 11 for dinner is typical here. So if there was more reference to others, that just didn't resonate for me as a study I would refer to apply to here. And then I agree with the trade-offs, and then we have things like not only the cost, but if we're trying to look at climate change mitigation and sustainability and doubling the number of buses on the road, even though you're still having the same number of trips and miles, but you still need more stuff to put the kids in to all be driving at the same time. And so that, to me, I'm in the environmental field. Health is moving us farther away from some of those objectives. And yeah, I understand the points that you've made, but, I also was more familiar with parents always being out with their children, the younger children. I certainly was, or my husband, so.
Can I ask a secondary question for the board? So I think it sounds like on the school start time question, that's not a place we plan to opine. I think there's also the question of the sort of traffic study. What are folks' thoughts about the purpose of that to Board of Health, or whether that's?
I mean, a traffic study, I don't think is directly in our purview, because we've talked about this before.
Yeah,
hasn't it been in the,
isn't it
the road safety committee and
Yeah, there is a specific
The traffic.
safety
Yeah,
committee.
yeah, 'cause we've asked
who
about
would
it
look at
before.
that, and in terms of, also, I think, in terms of Pine Hill being used as a shelter, if you're talking about a traffic study only for the Pine Hill entrance and exit or access.
And I think for the corner, the Elliott's and Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of using it as an emergency shelter, I don't see there being big overlap with it being used for regular school functions and for that at the same time. So to me, those are very different issues, and this is a little bit beyond what we need to talk about here, but if it gets to the point where people need to shelter at the school, things are going to be serious enough for people to leave their nice homes that they know everything about and go to be at the school. I'm not even sure people are going to be driving. I mean, if we get to that point of needing a shelter somewhere, the world is going to look very different. People aren't going to be driving and running out for coffee. It's going to be something else. So that piece of it, I don't see a lot of overlap with this particular issue, but we should always be concerned about safety. And again, if you haven't talked to the Traffic Safety Committee yet, they would be a good
Well, I think
group
I think
to
they
speak
have.
with.
I think the only thing he's asking us-
Board meeting, like, I feel like this came up when they were sort of talking about the exit road, like there's a presentation by Dr. Keogh, independent of the school start time, but it was sort of that piece of just having multiple points of egress as a school. And I think that was a piece that my recollection was.
Oh, yeah,
general support
and they
for
made
that.
the egress, the
That was the
road.
second road now.
Right.
Yeah.
And for that second road, they're also talking about what are the lines of sight, because it's a more difficult point for driving in and out of, apparently. I haven't looked at it closely myself, but, so that's on people's radar is something that they would study in connection with that.
It sounds to me like the main thing is, do we agree that there's a true health risk? And I think we can agree, but the problem is, it sounds like the concern is based on a change on a schedule that was based on other grounds.
Well, what I'd say
And
is,
it's
I think
already
for
been
us, it's
done.
really a question of, do we think there's a public health risk that means that we should supersede the activity of another board? For me, the answer to that is no.
Or make an alternative recommendation.
Right, that's right.
And I don't think I've studied it to the degree that others have, and I don't feel capable individually at the moment. Again, I can only look at my own experience, and I can read the studies, but certainly my own experience was that I don't think this would have been a problem. So I would want to understand more, and then there are, as you mentioned, just the trade-offs of what it means to do it.
I guess so.
So-
The two questions I'd have is I'm getting a sense of the sense of the board overall, and one is this is likely to be an evolving situation because there's more and more research being done on this now because the research started with the adolescents and is moving on. And is the board open as new studies come out to take a look at them as they come out?
Yeah.
Definitely.
And second, one of the thoughts is there any thought of recommending monitoring of what's going on? What is the impact actually going to be of this change? So we're making a big change both for the high school students and for the young ones, and I have no doubt it's going to be beneficial for the older ones. I mean, that's clear. But is it worth suggesting that the school actually monitor what actually does happen to the children, and is it having any negative impacts?
I would think that the school committee would want to assess effectiveness, so
Yeah.
is that, I can't believe that wasn't a component of this plan.
I mean, I'm not speaking for Andy, but.
I mean, you're nodding confidently.
Yeah.
You're off camera, but.
Well, I think that's kind of a no-brainer that they should, after 2 years, let's pause. Has this been beneficial in the ways that we anticipated? Are there unforeseen consequences, or is there new data that we need to consider and perhaps, modify? I think people went into this kind of, I'm hoping, eyes open, and that, yes, we should be trying to evaluate the benefits or the deficits in the switch, and, that it's going to be iterative. And
Don't we expect that to be the school committee?
yeah.
I also think the teachers and the school administration have always seemed to me, especially, I knew Pine Hill more closely because you get engaged at a different level when your child is younger, but
Absolutely,
I couldn't have
yes.
been happier with the school than with Pine Hill. I thought they were great, and they have the kids' interests at heart, I believe, so I think even if you didn't specify it, they would probably be doing it anyway and say, wow, we notice a big change.
And is that sort of evaluation of the impact anything that the Board of Health would be involved in partnering, at least in an advising capacity
What I
with
would
the
say is
schools?
I would kind of leave it, like, it always gets tricky, and again, love having select board here, but I think there's always this piece and this tension as you kind of try to manage your scope. So I think, I want to be clear about that. I would imagine this would be a school committee piece, and we'd certainly be happy to be involved if they wanted our input, and I would say that would be in
Or I
scope.
think we could even suggest that, that we'd like to participate in the post facto sort of evaluation process. I think that would be a legitimate interface between the board
Yeah.
and the school committee, and,
Okay.
I think to have another set of, but no, could we possibly do an epidemiological study or anything like that? No, that's well
Right,
beyond our
yeah.
scope and capabilities.
So happy to get articles, happy to collaborate with school committee. Does that sound right?
I think so, and that,
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I mean, nobody gets everything they want, but I think that would be a positive and constructive step.
Thanks so much for your time tonight, Phil. We really appreciate all your hard work.
And if you can point us to data that seems like it fits in our situation here, that I would be interested to read that.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thanks very much.
thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay,
So are we,
so I think we can get back to 29 Rockwood.
29
Agent's
Rockwood.
business.
So you're 29 Rockwood, and what are you here for?
51 North Main.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. All right, you 29 Rockwood, I think you're here first.
oh, yeah,
So who goes first?
29 Rockwood, I think was
we
here first.
started, so
Yeah.
I think
Started and stopped. And you're totally welcome to come up if you're so inclined.
Yeah, absolutely.
it's like that.
At 29 Rockwood received a request to deepen the well. That was a few
That I
weeks ago.
remember,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then we received,
Said I was going to come back.
March 2nd, on Monday, a new plan from Civilized Solutions to put in another well close to the existing well.
Mark, can you tell me the number of that
The
plan?
number is 20-16 for the additional well. Do you need the number for the other one?
No, I have it. Thank you.
So, the proposal is to deepen still the existing well and also to drill a new well. So with that said, bring it to the board for your review. The distances are being met as it relates to the distances to septic and other wells on the property, except for its own well. Well, no, he's staying 75 feet away, so that's included. So is the existing proposed and the existing is up here. It's uphill. So the owner's here, and he may want to explain why he wants two wells, and it'll be up to the board to decide if they
Okay,
wish
so,
to.
right, you
And I
had
think-
mentioned,
And I think maybe do we just want to update on the regulation? Because I think my recollection, this was also property that there was ledge disruption. That we, right.
Yeah.
And so I think that.
Double whammy.
But I think in that piece, there was a piece where it was like, hey, this was influx at the time the regulation's going into effect. So in that case, the regulation was interpreted not to apply since it was sort of a mid-project.
Yeah.
I think in this
However.
case, this is a different situation for the well piece of it, where now the well is in effect, which says property can have one well. And
So-
so,
and
I'll
Yeah.
probably give you some
Yeah.
chronological
Yeah.
context too. Is that at first we thought, instead of trying to drill a new well, which was a little more expensive procedure and more involving in general, we thought we were going to use the existing well and apply for just deepening and not worry about any offsets or any other stipulations. However, given the amount of bedrock and ledge we've discovered throughout the whole process, it will require us to dig deeper to get a well line from the existing well into
So-
the new well.
so it's sort of saying, how do I physically get water from that well to the house
To
that
the-
will involve a lot of ledge
More-
disruption?
Even more than we had already disrupted. That was one thing. And then we had Dover pump come and test the existing well for water capacity at first, and then if we had sufficient capacity, we would also test for water quality. And they discovered that we could only have 2 gallons per minute, and it wasn't consistent. And then we thought, okay, one is a deepening piece, but then there'll be a lot more disruption to it. Is there an alternative solution or placement for a new well? And we thought we have enough clearance from the new building
about 12 feet or so, that we can come much closer to the building without necessarily disrupting any better for water line to go into the house, but rather have only draining down for.
Which is fine, I mean, with a sonic well, that's, I mean, we're not
And
concerned about that.
So that's why we submitted the new application on Monday. So that's kind of the chronological.
And so did they give you a sense of the capacity from the proposed new well location?
They don't have any.
They can't tell yet.
Idea yet as far as what that would look like. It'll be a matter of depth, is what they're saying.
Right, because how deep is your current well, do you know?
This, I would want to say 150 to 175 feet.
Okay, so not a,
Is this-
not a very
Yeah,
deep well,
yeah. And then,
not trivial.
so I guess when we submitted the plan on Monday, we were not necessarily sure, well, I wasn't sure about the one well pit problem.
Yeah.
And my idea was kind of thinking, okay, if there is already some flow of water here, we could use that for irrigation in the back lawn, and then focus the use of this well for homes.
So,
And that was that, so.
okay, a couple of things. One, we do have a regulation that we don't want more than one well unless there's some really compelling reason. Now, for water supply, when people have dug wells, you have to get an adequate water supply for the home. And we really haven't had a lot of people who haven't been able to meet irrigation needs for something other than if they're doing agriculture or something. That that's needed. The other piece is if there's a drought, which is really the only time you'd need irrigation around here. We get plenty of water. That doesn't seem to be an issue for the most part. But during times of drought, we don't want people irrigating because now everyone's drawing from the same water resource. And so you're watering something rather than someone having water available for drinking water. So those are some of the reasons that we don't want two wells. Another one being there are complications on connecting two different wells to a house. And if you tend to use one more than another, right, one is the main water supply, one is irrigation, people can forget about the irrigation, it can become a conduit for contaminants into the ground, just often gets neglected and forgotten. So one well is absolutely our preference.
And I appreciate the explanation, actually, that helps me understand that. And I knew that coming in and asking to be
So what I would say is, I think we would say, don't love two wells, would like
Please
one
no.
well. Does that sound okay for you?
I'm good, I'm actually good, and we'll certainly be, we'll hopeful that we can sell enough water.
Yeah,
It is a-
because you want to get like 6 to 12, is that?
Yeah, if you well drill it, drill it
6 to 12
slow
gallons
enough.
per minute.
And the reason I say slow is the well drillers have informed me if you drill too fast, you can smear up some of the fissures that produce the water.
Right.
So if they drill slow enough, they will be able to see as they drill where the water's coming in from.
Yep.
And I haven't seen too many wells that aren't producing, typically 2 gallons a minute. Most of them produce 5 to 10.
Yeah,
So
which is what you
your
want.
percentages are good that you'll get a good running well, and I haven't heard any complaints in your neighborhood about production.
1.5 seems relatively shallow for Sherborn.
What? It is, it's on the, like, a lot of people's wells are more like 3 to 5
Yeah, our
feet.
house on 150 North Main is 250.
Yeah,
So
and even that's not bad,
And the one other, interestingly enough, as we were digging out foundations and everything, we discovered there was another well on the property. So that's why I was reacting.
But I would also say, I think going back to Daryl's point,
That's why we
the
don't-
decommissioning is super important because you sort of have a common area of fragmentation that may communicate, and so you don't want to have something where you say, I just have this thing that can be a conduit for bacteria, other contaminants to get into my drinking supply.
Or my septic
Did they
effluent,
abandon
or
Did they abandon that other
It's an
well?
abandoned one, yeah, I don't think.
Did they fill it in?
decommission it, like fill it with concrete.
I don't know, but.
They'll have to.
Yeah.
I think.
What I can do is, based on all our discussions, is as part of this, we can make sure that all well that was decommissioned is decommissioned
Filled up,
or handled
yeah.
properly, as
That'd
well
be
as the one that we.
That sounds, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you for
But thank
being
you
so
spending-
like.
Thank you for spending your evening with us.
That was a very relevant issue, because I have kids in.
Oh, okay.
Elementary, middle, and high school.
Oh, so,
Yeah.
oh,
yes,
you,
yeah.
Perfect.
And I'm with you. I'm.
you got the peanut butter
Yeah.
spread.
Absolutely.
You just-
If I can send the youngest one at 6:30.
Perfect. Perfect, sounds good. Mark, in terms of next steps, is there anything
So
else
next
we need to
steps would
put
be
down?
drill the new, well, for the board to approve the proposed well.
Okay,
And once the quality and quantity tests are completed, then a decision would be next to, well, it wouldn't be a decision, the next part of your vote should be to abandon the other two wells. But with the opportunity, you can always come back if there's issues with the new
So
drill.
does the plan need to read differently? It says.
Yeah, it shouldn't have
existing-
proposed and
Yeah, it says
existing.
to remain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just cross that out.
well, so can we can approve it subject to an
can't-
update to the plan?
I can't change Paul's plan.
No, we can't, but we could vote for the approval of the plan subject to Paul updating it to
Updating
move
the
that.
plan. Sure, that I don't see an
Okay.
issue with, but I can't
Yeah, no,
change
no.
the plan.
Yeah,
That,
we know-
it's
we
a
know
stamp,
that.
not your stamp.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
Perfect.
so do we have a motion?
So move.
You-
I'm really an
You
expert at
already
moving.
said, yeah.
Yeah.
Move
So do we
it
have a motion
subject
to
to
approve the
res-
wall plan subject to revision reflecting the abandonment of the existing well upon demonstration of adequate quality and quantity for the new well?
So moved.
All right, thanks so
Second.
much.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Have a
Okay.
great night.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, 51 North Main.
Okay.
So, what happened on 51 North Main Street is the owners are here, and I get to meet them finally. I got to talk with both of them on the phone. What they're proposing is pretty innocent when you look at it. It's,
Well, that's a bad way.
Yeah, yeah.
well, it is. I mean, if you were to be looking at what they're wishing to do, you would say, well, I don't see a major issue here. Their proposal, I think I got
We
two of the
feel like
same
there's a
plans.
but.
There's definitely a bug somewhere in there.
So, anyways.
You guys are also totally welcome to come up if you're so inclined.
Actually, I need that plan too, I think. That's the.
This one?
Yeah.
I think one's an as-is and.
Yes, I just
Oh.
realized that, so where's the
Okay, so
walls?
we have to-
So this is as is, and we want to concentrate on the second floor here where there's a hallway, a bedroom with kind of a slanted wall to get to the other bedroom. And they wish to take those bedrooms and straighten out, put a hall straight down and straighten out the walls, put the bathroom on this side and do that, which is really, doesn't look like it's
A
a
net-
big
it's a
issue.
net-
It's
it's a net zero?
50%, but what it does is, let me show you one thing that will.
I just care about the room count.
Yeah, well,
This is totally
really, we
wrong.
don't have a design flow for the septic system, unfortunately. What it is, this house was built in 1846.
1806 is this part.
It's-
This part of the house was 1820. The barn, which is
It's kind
separate,
of
was
neat, it's an older
1840.
home, it's probably one of the older homes.
Is this one near, like, where is this
This
located?
is the blue house opposite Butler Street, Sherborn.
Oh,
Okay, yep.
oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
What street
okay.
is it on?
It's North
on
Main.
North Main Street. It's right opposite Butler. It
Yeah,
used to be a dark brown shingle house.
No, it looks very nice now, I have to say.
So what?
I notice it now. Like, oh.
So that's the proposal, basically, as they even noted, it was very clear what they wished to do. But now, which is renovation of rear part of house comprising of 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, which you just saw. But this is the septic system. I'm sure a cesspool was put in at one time, and this is typically what you saw in cesspools. They would put additional lines off it. This one has 1 additional line. So that was done, who knows when. I've been looking through the records. The assessors do recognize the house through the years of checking the assessors records as a 4-bedroom, 9-room house. But then when you go to our building policies, you go through the whole list to find out, and I'm not for sure, were you able to determine if it was 50% or greater?
This is less than 50%.
Less than 50%.
It's 40%.
So we can go.
You mean in
through-
terms of modification, renovation,
It's-
okay.
So this part is a 3-story house.
Mhm.
This is only 2 stories. So
Mhm.
I would say probably less than.
And also, just on the, why that even matters is there's long been a policy of trying to have whatever the infrastructure is for a home match what the house is looking like. So as it gets modernized and upgraded, and that there's, you know, some assumption on the part of future owners of what is.
Someone else may walk in here and say, "Oh, this is a new house," you know, and not realize they have a non-conventional septic system. And again, they've been very great.
When was the transaction? When did you guys?
2015.
And so, and it passed Title V.
Yeah, it passed in July 2nd of 2015. So, depending on, I couldn't get assessors records back to the 1800s, but, you know, was it a 50%?
Two goats every year.
If it was, and what it says is there's two options. If it's not considered 50%, then we just say, see footnote number 1, which says a garbage grinder is not permitted unless the required additional capacity exists for it, and sewage ejector pumps, da-da-da-da. But it also says must be reviewed for approval by the local board of health per state regulations, because you're dealing with a non-conventional unknown bedroom count for the septic system. And if it was to be 50%, if you're looking back from when it all started back in 1800, then it would say one of two things: a system upgrade or a deed recording will be required at the discretion of the Board of Health. Again, and then it refers to footnote 3, which is about the deed recording on extensive upgrades to the building served by the septic system. Existing septic system capacity does not have any documentation. Kind of
So that's
goes
kind of
into-
what it would say.
Yeah, this is, I give a previous board member a lot of credit for this chart. It really helps you flow through very complicated situations. As I said when I first started the conversation, it appears as innocent as ever. It's really not adding
And
much.
is
But
it,
it's,
is the room revision on both stories or on one story in terms of moving walls?
It's both stories and using walls, actually. So the ground.
So the walls are.
So this is the ground one here. So at the moment, so the ground floor is here. So we'll be taking out this staircase, so this staircase here, and opening up this ground floor. So make that one kind of big room. And then on the second floor, we'll straighten this wall, move the bathroom to there, and the bedroom will fundamentally stay where it is.
And you're not modifying the exterior walls at all? It's all
Everything, all the
internal?
exterior, all the windows.
It's less than 50%. And
Yeah, so I think the only question is, because you're making these modernizations and renovations, do you want to just have something saying, like, by the way, we don't know exactly what the septic system is and it wasn't modified, like, just kind of as a hello for, because you know it, but when you go to sell it, like Daryl was saying, the next person might think like, oh, and then again, a 50%, you know, change, and like, so we're not going to be around necessarily, and so where's, you know, just having some kind of documentation, like, that it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not gonna hurt the value of your house or anything to do that,
well,
but.
to be honest with you, the Title V inspector, when you do go to sell, may consider it accessible, even though it's a leach line off it. Title V, the state code on septic systems, defines that as it's a non-conventional, but they consider the cesspool a septic tank because it has a line off it. But we see it as a cesspool that someone added a line to.
Yeah.
So, which now, under our regulations,
You can't have.
The law may have to
Yeah.
update it anyways. All I'm trying to say is it's not detrimental in any way.
It's informational.
It looks like the septic's gonna have to be upgraded when you sell anyways.
No, we knew that going into buying.
It wouldn't be a bad idea.
I'll say from our perspective, our long-term plan in the house is to upgrade the septic, because at some point we may want to add on to the house, add another room, I don't know where, But
And you may
that's
want to make
more
sure you're
common.
drinking cleaner water.
Yes. Unless it's
That's what
more
we
the
want to
fact
see
we
first.
want
Always a
to
plus.
do that today.
I think that's okay. I think just, but to, you know, give us reassurance and it doesn't, it's not detrimental to you guys. It's informational. I think that would be a good.
Ultimately upgrade, it's essentially.
It's a safety mechanism, basically.
So you're proposing a deed recording?
Yeah, but just saying a fact.
And so, and then if that deed recording happens, if we then
Upgrade the
upgrade.
system.
Then you terminate it,
Right.
you terminate it, yeah.
And it basically would go on to footnote 3, if that's what you
Yeah.
wish, which would say, you know, the septic system has not been upgraded, but, you know, the capacity is unknown.
So the other thing, you could get maybe some insight into what it would mean to replace your septic, because you would qualify for variances, because it's an existing home, and would be definitely an environmental health improvement. Is maybe see if, I don't know if any of the neighbors have done septics recently to get a sense of what things are like there, but if I recall, you're kind of up on a
Yeah, on
hill.
the hill.
That might be a good thing, you know, if there's all ledge under there. Not a good thing, but it might.
It's actually, it's out like.
Butler Street, some of those homes have had all beautiful gravel, you know, it's like an ester going up that hill on
And
one
they're
side.
higher than
But what it
Butler
says,
Street,
like,
and you're not in a
I can't tell
wetland,
you
so you
why.
probably.
I don't think it's gonna
not
be
the
that bad.
worst.
I would say if you've got this
conditions.
plan and you're saying we have a stage-wise piece, we have lots of opinions and we will long for the day that your cesspool's replaced, but it sounds like there's a set of stages as you maintain a 200-plus-year-old house in our community, for which we should be collectively grateful. I think that you can do that with these plans. Our messaging to you would be, once that stage comes, we will be very happy to help replace the system that will
We
try
look
that.
forward to that, then it's smooth steps.
But I think the other piece to just highlight in terms of the room count, so you sort of heard us talk about the room count, and the big reason there is because as kind of coming out with a system that is a failed system, the approach of the board historically, and I think intended to the future, is that you can upgrade and do pieces with variances because you're replacing a failed system, whereas if you're building a new house, that wouldn't be a variance you would approve. It's the fact that we're now saying we're adding a net volume of safety. Here's upside for the homeowner to be able to add another count, but especially if you're doing things on the second or third floor, in Sherborn that counts as a bedroom. And so as you sort of contemplate things that do change the room count, tying that to the septic will be critical, because it will be very hard to move anything above the ground floor without having your septic be changed.
You couldn't add any more rooms. You
Yeah.
pretty much, this would be probably the maximum that you could do with a deed recording.
And you guys do not have a garbage grinder, correct? Garbage disposal?
Because that's part of the footnote.
That's the.
But the thing in the sink, so you
That
totally don't
grinds
want
up
one, but if there's a
stuff.
thing in the sink that food goes down and you grind, you absolutely do not want one, because it's bypassing the human digestive system, which is breaking down some of it, and now you're just putting it in a hole in the ground.
Okay,
So if you have a garbage grinder, remove it, because it is terrible for the system you have.
okay. Yes.
But, I mean, if you were to increase the capacity of your septic system now while you're replacing it from what it is.
But they're not
No, no,
replacing
no, they're
it.
not.
We're saying they don't need to replace it. They can future step.
Right, no, I'm just giving you advice. I'm just saying a statement, which is that if you decided that you wanted to have that you think down the road you might do something, you might want to consider the size of septic placement system that you put in at a point where you end up replacing this.
Yeah, understood. If we're gonna
That's all
go to
I'm
the
saying.
expense of putting one in,
Yeah.
let's make sure it's.
It will
more
allow
than
you
enough
flexibility in the
capacity.
future.
And not that we're trying to hasten your departure from town, but maybe if you ever want to sell, you'd have to do it anyway. So if you did it sooner, you will benefit in the meantime.
That is
So.
part of
The value of
the
the home
legacy that we
definitely
plan
goes
to leave.
What do we need to vote on, if anything?
Well, I think-
Ask that the board consider those footnotes and vote on the removal of the garbage disposal that exist. I will have to confirm that. And
It
then,
does, there is one.
and then footnote 3 talks about the type of deed recording
Yeah.
you're wishing to do, and that gives you a good explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say
So it sounds
that.
like I would draft the deed recording. Would it include both the prohibition
For
of
the
the
garbage.
garbage?
I think
grinder
it-
And,
And that's
So
in-
they'd have to take it out.
Oh, and that's in footnote 1 and footnote 3 of the policy, of the building procedure policy. And then you would pick that up, Ellen would draft it for you, so you don't have to have an attorney draft
or I
it.
could
And then,
email it.
or should I- and then it's, we would have, before I could approve your plan, we would have to assure the garbage grinder, and I would have to be assured, well, we would get
We'd have to
evidence
get
from
the
the
deed recorded.
registry
Yeah.
that you recorded that deed. And then once those two come in, I can sign the building application.
I'm good?
If the board so votes, I mean, I'm
Yes.
going by what the board.
Yes,
So-
no, I think.
Do we have a motion to approve Mark's approval of the building application, subject to receipt of the deed recording with the 2 stipulations?
So moved. As shown on building application 20-12.
I seconded.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye. We're getting punchy.
Yep, exactly.
So I'll probably send that to you hopefully late tomorrow. I'm at a meeting tomorrow morning. I'll try to get it to you tomorrow. If not tomorrow, it'll definitely get it to you by Monday.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night, guys.
All right.
So, I know it's late. Do we just want to kind of close out coronavirus discussion with any remaining topics?
Well, I'm interested in what you learned at the Board of Health in Dover.
No, so I think, just to kind of recap next steps to make sure everybody's on the same page and to highlight areas of kind of potential involvement. So, Dover Board of Health was just sort of discussing the general topic of thinking about how to give common guidance to the schools and kind of collaborative input, especially as we may have things that have a fairly rapid cadence as we get new information. And so what we identified was that, as we previously talked about areas of collaboration, this was like one that was appropriate. What we suggested was having a subset of the respective boards do it, again, in the kind of same way that we've asked you guys to help be our liaison in connections with the select board, similarly for Dover Board of Health. I don't know that they've totally arrived on what their representation strategy will be. I think the next step there is going to be a meeting with, I think Daryl and I, 1 or 2 members of their board. I think they were deciding that, and then Dr. Keogh and Joe Fedor, who I think is the nursing lead for the district, to kind of help be explicit, and I think also the visiting nurse, to be explicit and kind of understanding here the next steps, here are communication plans, because I think they're pieces of the school is getting an enormous amount of outreach from families or from people who are like, I know there's a nurse here, I want to call. And so how do we help support the school in answering the question for our community members? How do we give, I think if you look at a lot of the DPH pieces, what they say is work with your local board. I think that's a lot of guidance the school gets. So having a clear, concise way to say, how do we do that? Because some of these things may be quickly turning around. So I think that will be.
They issued the school did put out a general letter though about.
Yeah, so that was last week, and so I think that there are other pieces where if you then look at as we have things that are more contact, like we have more active disease in the community, then some of that guidance gets more specific about who do you contact, and I think there are other pieces that, again, depending on what disease prevalence ends up being, thinking about things like we may get really clear guidance from the state to say DPH says you have COVID, you are going to be home.
Yeah.
But what do we do if classroom? This kid
Because,
had COVID
the problem
in
is
this classroom.
confidentiality. How do you ensure patient confidentiality and unwillingness of people to self-quarantine?
No. So this is separate. But I think we may have very clear guidance. I think what we experienced this week is that we had very clear guidance from some areas and resolving ambiguity in others, where I think DPH was trying to do best practice. And so you can imagine examples of sibling in middle school has COVID. Younger siblings at Pine Hill. What happens there?
Right.
Kid at Pine Hill has COVID. What happens to that classroom?
Quarantine everybody.
But I think those become the questions that they'll look to us, and they may lack clear state guidance.
Right, so you had contact with patient X who had it. What are your obligations?
Right, and then how does the school make consistent decisions? Nobody's saying anything. I think we're just saying we need to have a clear line of communication of if it's a middle school, does that mean Dover Board of Health decides? Does that mean Sherborn weighs in? How do we do it so we're consistent? So we don't say Pine Hill has this rule, Chickering has that rule, and we're asking the school district. So I think that
I think we should be consistent.
And I think Dover's inclined to look at it as the district as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That would be crazy.
I think it was a very collaborative discussion. I think there's a lot of receptiveness to it. It felt like a good discussion to me, and I think that's what I heard.
Constructive.
I think it was really constructive and thoughtful. I think people were making good choices. And then there's a larger conversation as we think about, so one of the things that came up for Dover, which we've also seen in Sherborn, is around again, this intersection of having a plan and then thinking about all the different pieces that we need to move. And this is a great time to work on those pieces before we need them, so that our hope is we never need them, but if we do, we don't want the first time we do it to be
Reactive.
the first time we need it. And so I think thinking about what does that look like, I think we have a lot of planning that's been previously generated that there's some elements we need to update and communicate about, and then I think there'll be a lot of next steps in terms of working with the other departments in town that Ellen kind of helped initiate in terms of the local emergency planning. And then I think Daryl and I are going to be at the meeting, the select board meeting on the 12th, I think, but also thinking about, as we, again, our hope is we don't need these things, but in thinking about if we do get to a place where there's quarantine or enforcement or other pieces, what are the parts on the town side we need to have ready? I think one issue that we talked to Ellen a little bit about is also just the larger question of, right now I think we're okay. If we end up having a really big footprint, we may get to the place that we outpace the ability of our current infrastructure to support the asks of the Board of Health, and what does that look like in terms of getting resources and supports, whether it's additional hours for existing staff or other strategies for staffing. And so I think those are kind of the big discussions. I think that probably the next step in terms of Sherborn planning is one of these days, hopefully sometime today, I'll remember the name, the emergency committee. LEPC. I think that's probably the next step.
I think one thing I would add to what you said, I agree with everything you said, is that the difficult steps would be before that, where there's this vague situation. If you have a child that has the sniffles or a low-grade fever, what do you do?
I think this is
keep them home.
Test it.
At what point do you seek medical attention? Before we get to having cases and having to handle it, we're going to have this ambiguous stage.
So I think we communicated some of this to Dr. Keogh, and I think one of the pieces we have to, so I think there are a couple of pieces that we kind of put to the school. I think the school's been wonderful about this and thoughtful and engaged and really receptive. This feels like a good set of interactions between the boards and the school to me.
Yes.
I think that we had a question about what's a bus cleaning protocol, because I think there's some data about the persistence on solid surfaces.
Yeah.
We see MBTA and other areas doing this, but just to make sure we have an explicit shared expectation with our bus contractor to know what's going to happen and that we feel comfortable with the protocol.
Yes.
And then I think also just how to, again, the battalions have a fairly low threshold to keep our kids home from school.
Yeah.
But, there are lots of parents of school-age kids where there's a lot of sniffles. And how to, in this period, do we denormalize typical behaviors that you're like, do not give your kid Tylenol and send them to school.
Right.
In this environment and window, we really have to say, collectively, if your kid's a little bit sick, keep them home, because that, if we get community spread, that could certainly be COVID in a 6-year-old and really severe illness in an older adult in our community.
You can't disclose HIPAA information, obviously, that's a record, but let's say your kid, comes down with sniffles and spent all the, yesterday afternoon at the library using the PC at the library.
Right.
No, it gets very complicated.
Well, so I think that some of those, in this,
Parents have to be educated too.
So I think it's also if there's a case, and I think that so if we had a COVID case, we may say that's not information that we would disclose, but that then falls into the VNA contract in terms of doing the contact tracking, and if it's this is somebody in so and so's class, who are the other kids in that class, what were the special activity, that falls into that bucket in terms of saying who made.
So it sounds like almost like a risk decision tree, if this, then that's kind of a process.
DPH really wants to be engaged, is my take from all of the communications I've sort of had one off, is that they're call us.
Yeah.
Because I think that we don't have rules that we can say this will always be right. And so I think my take home is, they're going to be busy too, but I think they've been really saying, we want to be in communication. I think the other piece that had come up and that we sort of talked about is there's a lot of natural focus on the schools, but the data we've seen so far for coronavirus is kids seem to be doing well with it. I think that thinking about what we need to do and how we engage with Council on Aging or other older adults, which may be higher risk.
Yeah, the Council of Aging has already sent out, in addition to the link, they do a weekly email.
Perfect.
They've already sent out this morning, in fact, that link with the link to the Mass Department of Health and all those fact questions.
Perfect. Good.
And so they had a very nice write-up for the Sherborn COA.
And I think we might want to have a strategy, maybe, of how to support folks who are at greater risk if this gets more widespread around here, which looks like it may, to help them remain at home more. You know, arrange or help to get
They may
food to them and
have
that
to.
sort of thing, so that they can stay home and isolate themselves rather than always trying to isolate those who are sick, because that is difficult
And I think thinking
when
about
people are
Woodhaven too, and like
asymptomatic.
other supports or like just how to be proactive to kind of say, this is the window to do this stuff, because, you know.
But to go-
Schools are in a better position than, there are obviously the HIPAA issues, but employers have
Yeah.
Americans with Disability Act issues.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of advisories with very difficult guidance on what to do because of ADA
interesting.
issues. But in the school setting, the ADA doesn't apply, so other than for.
And I don't think, I don't know that I understand the ADA issue. Can you help me understand? Is it?
It's, the ADA protects somebody with a disability or a perception of a disability, so that limits what you can and can't do for employees.
Okay.
And, the newsletters from the law firms go on for about 10 pages.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a permanent disability, it's an illness, so like, I mean, and to get covered by short-term disability, I think you have to be out like a minimum of
Some of the
3
guidance.
weeks or 6 weeks.
Some of the guidance is that it is like a flu, it's short-term.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if it turns into a pandemic,
Yeah.
So the Department of Public Health already has a system of notification for strep. So if somebody in second grade has strep throat, the entire school is notified. I mean,
No, but there's no, I mean, that's not my experience of, like, I've gotten 0 notifications of the entire school.
No, it's not the entire school, it might be your
the class,
classroom.
the class,
Yeah.
the context. So I think there would be easy to be consistent with that, with
No,
this
I
in
mean,
the
there's, like,
elementary
there's
schools.
really, I think there's really, no. I mean, I think that the DPH has been really clear about this is PHI. You can't, like, even in, I mean, like on the DPH call, it was like, people are asking, can we communicate this to the fire department to say which houses, and the guidance from the state was
No, because
absolutely
that's a
not.
violation
No,
of
but that's different. That's
No,
that's
but I mean,
identifying
strep,
who
you
the
don't have to
patient is.
self-isolate for 2 weeks, and it's not like, you know.
I don't think it's a.
It's
for
not
us,
really
like-
comparable.
No, but what I would say is, like, I think.
But I didn't really get to finish what I was saying. So what I was saying is the value with strep, the value is to notify those who might have been exposed, so they know, so they can they can decide what action to take. And it doesn't identify the patient.
But what would you
So
take
in
that?
the elementary schools,
Everybody
might be-
knows though, like, if you were in a classroom that some
There's
kid had a
14 kids.
coronavirus and they're like not.
14 kids and one's gone tomorrow.
Yeah, you're gonna know, and then the whole family is gonna be like
I mean, there's a whole.
stigmatized.
So what I would say is, I think
I'd be
what I would
worried about
advise is
that.
I would work closely with the state and not develop independent pieces of how we communicate.
Yeah, let's defer to them.
And I think, because I think they had really clear guidance about a bunch of issues that other towns raised on the call. And so I think that it may be that here's a test. And my guess is that it would be, you know, if you're in kindergarten and you've got a kid with coronavirus, my guess is that they'll say, all of these kids are like close contacts.
Test them.
Right. Well, it may be tested, but I think what we don't know is how, like, the test performance isn't totally clear yet. And so if you have false negatives, you could
Yes.
say, like, my guess is they'd actually say you should be on self-quarantine for 14 days and tested if you're symptomatic.
Just presumptive.
Right, because if you're negative, it's not, I think it's.
You might not be negative.
But, and it's a question of like, how, you know, how do you balance that? But I think that's a stuff the state will know more about. Right now, the testing is going through the state, and so I think they also will have better insight about the test characteristics than anybody else. I think that will ultimately evolve into more local testing. That hasn't gotten there yet, although they've liberalized the criteria. And then I think the other thing that came up in the discussion was just, and I think these are questions that went to Jill, is like, somebody's like, I had the sniffles, I was at, like, lots of reasonable questions. And I think, as I'm like kind of wearing my hat in town, like, the goal is not to have hundreds of people who are basically fine come to a hospital with cancer
Freaking
patients to say, like, I want to
Yeah.
get tested for this contagious virus. I think that the guidance is really call your doctor and do risk stratification. And, like, if you're sick, you should come in. But if you're fine, you've had lots of other viral illnesses.
Yeah.
And you coming in to seek acute hospital care may tie up resources for people who are critically ill.
Right.
And so I think, again, it goes back to the question of how do we message within the community versus CDC versus DPH. But I think that's the other piece to kind of generally be aware of is, I think we will have more testing. I think as we have testing, we'll identify more disease because we've had extremely good
Yeah, I'm sure
testing
it's
so far.
underreported
Yeah.
right now, yeah.
And, you know, if people ask questions because they're on the Board of Health, like I would say the guidance is call your doctor and they'll sort of risk stratify. And this guidance has changed multiple times over the last 2 weeks from the CDC.
So
I
do
would
we
just
need to
follow
re-
the guidance.
Yeah, do we need to reach a decision about communication mechanisms, or is that what you guys are gonna discuss with the school and figure that
so-
out?
With the school, questions could be, do we post anything on our website? And then the complex nature of posting things on the website, or do we just provide links
Well,
to
what I-
other resources, or are people going to come?
And that are constantly updated, like, so
Yeah,
that's the
right.
thing, like, you don't want someone to, like, I would never post a sign saying like, here's what you need to do.
Right.
But you can say, here are some resources, links.
Yeah.
Note that the DPH is regularly updating, so if you have, concerns and want to stay current on information, check it on a daily basis.
It's much more likely they'll be able to keep their website.
Yeah.
up.
Well, they have an obligation
The
to.
351 towns
Yeah.
will be able to.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So I think just funneling them to centralize,
No, and your
that
point
wouldn't be a
about-
bad thing.
Right, people have to be told to keep checking it,
Right.
because it has been.
If they're really care,
Yeah,
and
I
like,
think-
don't call us like every day.
Well, I think we're
Yeah.
totally happy to hear from
Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
anytime.
yeah.
But what I'd say is I think there's probably a piece on the school side that ends up push communication to families.
Yeah.
You know, like I think with the updated guidance for quarantine,
Mhm.
that's probably push communication to the families from the school. I think what we want to think about is a little bit like, you know, the reality is I think the school's structurally a place where we have an institution, and so there's a mechanism to say you can send this to every family and they expect to receive this from
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I think it gets harder if we think about
The
you know,
town.
the town, and like, you know, my personal bias is I think we probably push from the school not because it's risk, but because it's structure. But if we think about risk for the town, I think the guidance, if you're a Woodhaven resident or if you're an older adult, is really still to go to the CDC. And I think we probably have a much narrower set of things that are like, here's the emergency notification. Like I would, like right now, I think our DPH guidance is like, you're gonna get a case by the state. So even if we had a Sherborn resident who had it, there wouldn't be a code, there wouldn't be a notification. Somebody's got it.
No.
Like there'd be a mass DPH saying, you know, there's our county with a case.
Yeah.
We got, just so you
Yeah.
know, we got three, I haven't read them yet, from the town council, 3 HIPAA-related documents relative to coronavirus today.
In terms of case violations or in terms of guidance?
Or things to watch out for, kind of?
Yeah.
If that could be forwarded to us,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's,
Could you forward those to us?
Yes.
I'd love to read those.
Yeah.
All right, so a couple other things.
Oh, yeah. Anything
I want
else
to
that you guys-
mention that Matt is working on this issue at the hospital that you're
Yeah.
at. So he is a wonderful resource because they are.
I've got the cleanest hands in town, but I'm still touching my face 22 times.
And just the kind of issues that they're dealing with.
Baptist surgeons have the cleanest.
Oh, that's probably
hands in town.
true. Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Such as mentioned, so first I want to ask you, if we get into something that is very demanding of time, would you be willing to work extra hours?
Yeah.
Yes. So this, excuse me, now I need you
Money
folks.
stuff, money stuff.
So she already is working extra hours, and we may get to a point where she's going to be working a lot more extra hours, and can we compensate her for that? I know she's on salary, but it's a lot now. She's already always working more than
I'll open the
what
door
the.
advisories in the next.
Just make sure, when you ask, just cough a lot.
Yeah.
We're just the back row guys.
Because if we give her comp time at the end, we just won't see her for months.
Yeah.
So I think it would only be fair
Well-
to make it, whether, I don't know what you would call it, but some kind of
Emergency
stipend, emergent, something. And then,
Can I just ask you a question for Jean? So I'm supportive of that. I also think the question is, are there sets of tasks outside of coronavirus scope that Jean can support and take off your plate?
Yeah.
And so is there also an
Because she
ask for
has
added
been.
time for Jean? Do we know if Jean would want additional hours, or is that something?
if she goes above 19 and a half per week. Okay, so she has a little bit of room, and then we could cross that bridge, but find out if she would ever want to
Yeah.
work more, and then we'd have to talk to advisory about whether that would kick her into a benefited position, blah, blah, blah. you know,
But I'd say
specific-
this is totally the time to do it, because if
Yeah.
we end up having cases, we're gonna be up to our ears.
Yeah. Two other things, so on the bus, with the bus cleaning, that was something that Matt brought up, so I relayed that to the school administration, and I was just checking my phone, and Andrew Keough replied that he was able to reach the bus company, and they're going to increase the cleaning frequency. So that might be something going out to the parents, too. And then, speaking with the representative from the Dover Board of Health who was here, he's had started the process of having their town clerk look into what kind of emergency meeting procedures might we be able to have where things wouldn't always be posted meetings, or there'd be a need for a quorum of a board or several boards to get together, and whether there are special circumstances that would permit that. So he was getting the sense that there might be something to be done there.
If it's an emergency, I think you can have an emergency meeting.
So we might want to find out, can we have an emergency, not that I want an emergency
Right.
meeting a day, but
Right.
I would think that this qualifies.
You can always have remote participation as well.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
It takes some time to set it up. It
Yeah.
doesn't get set up on 24 hours notice, but
Yeah.
the other thing with larger than 3-member boards, it's easier to get a quorum.
Yeah.
Which doesn't include Dover, Select,
Yeah.
narrowly.
Okay.
Are there any concerns that you guys have about issues we haven't raised today, or any things that sort of with your lens you'd want to see on the radar?
Are there enough test kits?
I think this is the piece.
Sounds so funny.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna see, I think right now, the state's the repository, I think there's a lot of sites that are then working towards being able to test independently. I've heard varying amounts of time about how long it will take to get to that, and I don't know that what I hear from my own shop is representative of others in the state. I think, like, as a hospitalist, what I'd say is, if we do get to a place where 2 weeks from now we're like, oh, it turns out there's like 1,000 cases in Massachusetts and there's just a lot of people who are minimally symptomatic, this is definitely a year we're seeing a ton of flu. From overall flu prevalence, it's a high year. For hospitalizations, it's like a medium high year. But it's being able to separate out if we do get spread, and part of what makes that hard is that the COVID test, like you can get a flu PCR in like an hour or two, and the kind of contact precautions and other pieces make the testing still somewhat complicated to just think about how do you make good and prudent choices.
So Korea has set up
The drive-throughs,
testing
yeah.
sites, where you don't have to get out of your car, you don't have to have insurance, it's free.
Yeah.
You just do a drive-through test, and you're not really exposing anyone while you're getting the test done.
Yeah. And so I think there's ongoing, I don't think we're at a place where
My
we're in
Pence is working on it, don't worry about it.
that fills me with reassurances. But I think that there's a piece too of, we've liberalized the test, but it's going to be tricky in the acute setting because this was a very, very constrained test for a while.
Yes.
And now we've liberalized it, but that may mean that there's an enormously larger volume that's going to the state. And my general impression has been that they've been responsive and kind of doing, like, I've been satisfied as somebody who, thinks about this at work and thinks about it here. Is it perfect? No, but for where we're at, does it seem like we're on track? Like, it feels about right to me.
Yeah.
For what that's worth.
To go back to your earlier question, one thing we may need to think about within the schools is also school sports.
Yeah.
Because you're in close proximity in a locker room perhaps with teams, and
Right.
there may be some.
But I don't know that it's closer than when you're doing a lab project with your
I
Well,
lab
I
partner.
think that's a place where I'd expect to get DPH guidance and state guidance pretty
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah.
I think the other
Just
thing to
see
think
if
about
there's
is like,
anything specific about
I think
that.
like large gatherings and also thinking about like,
It's gonna be a sporting event, too.
What
Right.
about
Or
school
church.
play, or, I mean,
Just-
And
they
all the
just canceled,
spectators at the sports, it goes on and on and on.
conference at the,
Seafood
events.
Yeah.
Now, that's might be more an economic decision than a health decision,
Yeah.
I don't know, but.
Perfect, okay.
Okay.
Some more to come.
So you're gonna maybe have meetings next week?
Yeah, we're trying to set something up with looked over in the schools, assuming more stuff will happen, and also
Yeah.
to have another communication go out from them with some additional information about it.
Let us know if you want us to
Yeah.
join.
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch of just, this is such a, I think the communication responsibility is a place that is where our biggest risks are.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, I really like using this time to practice those communication pathways and to kind of say, hey, here's how we're putting our heads together. You know, I think there's like the memo we got from the state today, which is that now they've revised the travel advisory, everybody's level 3 should self-quarantine.
Right.
You know, I think that we sort of got a heads up on that issue because Joe Fedor helped flag it. We were able to kind of quickly do it. So by the time we get this guidance, we'd already had our questions answered from DPH. So you're not sort of, I've got a memo, now I don't know. I think Ellen was able to follow up with them, get all our questions answered, so we sort of have this. The places that are not as clear as we might wish them to be, we actually already have guidance to say, and you're like, great, how can we get that
You know
communication?
how to go, that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, and I won't go to the meeting, but we need to know what else the town needs to be prepared to do, and like
Yeah.
you said, not learn on the fly.
Yeah.
So if we have to have, if we have to close the library, or we have to
Yeah.
have everybody telework for
Yeah.
town employees, or whatever it is.
I think we have to open the library.
Open it.
Haven't heard those words in a while.
We don't even-
So now
we have
the
insurance
library-
on the building right now, it's the only problem.
Now, the library is a response strategy.
But
To this sense.
the other thing I just highlight is I think, I made this point separately, Ellen, but I think is important to acknowledge publicly, is I think there's a ton of stuff over the years that in the 11 years since H1N1, like Ellen's done a ton of work that when people sort of say, where are you, why aren't you doing it? Like, I think we're very well positioned for a town of our size, secondary to all the time you've spent kind of staying connected to state resources and other things. And I think this is just a lesson learned of, boy, I'm glad you took that time, because you may say, why aren't you in the
Oh, yeah.
office today? But you're like, boy, I'm glad you were there, because it feels under control.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing all that.
Thank you.
You are an amazing
Yeah.
resource.
Now let's do something easy like general chemical.
Yeah.
Right. I got nothing.
I just wanted to, so it came, actually, this might kind of involve you. Hold on.
Did we get data? 'Cause I
No,
have
they're going to
nothing.
be starting to install the system to do the treatment for a portion of the contamination. TRC, who has been engaged on Framingham's behalf and has done some for us, mentioned that there are a few comments they would make on the proposed approach because they have a very limited budget, and so Drew Smythe apparently has some experience with these kinds of systems and mentioned that just the way they heat things up and how they coordinate and time things could extend your dollars essentially and create a different level of effectiveness. Do we want for him to prepare something on Sherborn's behalf? So that would mean funds, and previously the contract has been under Select Board, and then for us, we need to consider whether we need additional support, I don't know, at the moment from Ethan for any kind of monitoring of the situation rather than us monitoring it, I guess is what it would come down to.
Carol, would our comments be any different than the Framingham comments?
Framingham is not making so many because,
I'm sorry, I thought TRC was representing Framingham as well.
yeah, but I don't know that they're actively working for Framingham now because they view their risks as different. We're concerned about groundwater quality, they're concerned about air
Vapor-
quality
vapor
issues.
intrusion.
Immediate
And
area, yeah.
anything that happens that might affect the school.
Is the plan
Or
still-
safety during the operations and notifications during the
So
operations.
less concerned
So it's a
about remedy
different set of
effectiveness. Yeah.
conditions. They would not seek to have the comments. we
I
have.
mean, to be honest, I don't know. I'm semi-ambivalent because they're just dealing with the source area anyway. They have a limited budget. I think they're gonna
No,
get.
he's talking about making that budget more effective.
Tweaking
It wasn't
it.
anything.
Yeah.
He
I mean,
was able
it's-
to jot it to me. It's not like an
Yeah,
enormous
I
effort.
mean, I think if it's a very minimal effort,
We
we got
were-
nothing to lose, but I don't have high hopes that they're gonna actually necessarily take any
no.
comments.
Yeah, the remediation budget is so limited. Is it still thermal remediation?
It's thermal, but it's like the areas have changed a few times and they've gotten smaller because everything is more expensive than.
It's roughly the size of this table.
anticipated. Yeah,
Great.
so.
Yeah, but I
um,
think when you look at the testing that the DEP, the other time when the DEP wasn't pleased with the intervention, it could just be not overseeing the work, but being able to then communicate to residents of Sherborn what was encountered and what was done. So it
Wait,
might
are
be
you talking about two different things?
No, I don't think I am. I'm not talking about the DEP now. I'm talking about the remediation. Would you want to be there so that you can then educate?
Oh, God, no. Yeah. To oversee, look at the remediation, are you saying?
What are you proposing?
Okay.
Maybe I'm not understanding.
Okay, so when the, so I don't know it well enough, because honestly, it was a little jotted note during the meeting where he said they need to consider
Yeah.
these things to maximize the efficiency of the treatment, and it was something along the lines of the rate at which you heat up, or how you coordinate exactly the positioning, or if you have to take something down. I could see the dynamic of, are you overheating in one area, or the, whatever. That might change how it's off-gassing,
It's
or how much
efficiency,
energy you're
getting
using, that kind of
efficiency.
thing. So
Yeah.
that's,
More technical details.
yeah.
Right, in the actual treatment system.
Tweaking.
area.
And again, I could ask him how much time he thinks that would take him, on your behalf if you want.
It should
It's
take
just a
him
question whether you want
half an hour.
Sherborn to be weighing in or not. Yeah, no.
I mean, and so that's why it wouldn't be a lot of money, so I think it's okay, and then we could be on record saying like, hey, we understand there's limited budget, but it's might as well optimize it.
Mhm.
And that's all that's saying.
Yeah.
The other stuff was, having us go oversee them taking the water samples, because there were
Well,
concerns about that.
we were not overseeing, we were observing.
Observing, yeah, I know.
It was
I'm
to
going to make
educate
that
us.
point, so I'm now contradicting
And part of
myself.
that was the
Perfect.
first set of results when people asked about, the
I
public
haven't seen
asked
any
about
data.
how that was. They,
Have we gotten data back?
No, not yet.
Okay.
oh.
I should.
Actually,
we
they
should-
said it was going to be ready
We
the
should
night
have
of the
seen-
public meeting.
We should have seen data.
Yeah, and he said, oh, we'll send it out Monday, and that was how many weeks ago?
Weeks. You
Yeah.
asked me to make a
Like
bunch of phone calls, which I haven't done, but I'm waiting, if we get results, because I realize
I'm
people are
gonna
gonna
send
say,
him an email
well,
right
what
now."
happened? I was like, I don't know, we don't have
Yeah.
any results. Well, why not? It's been like
I'm
4
gonna send
weeks.
him. I'm sending.
Lisa's on it.
I'm
Okay.
sending a letter.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Chris.
Okay. All right,
So
so
we
I'll
knew-
just ask TRC, is that the scoop?
I think it's an ask, but it's little, and I think
Yeah.
it's, the intent is to be a light footprint.
Yeah, no,
No,
I
it's
don't
okay.
mean ask them to do it, ask them to say how much it would, how long
Yeah.
it would take
Oh,
them
yeah,
to
yeah.
do it.
that
So
sounds
we can
perfect.
decide, is it a $500 effort or a $12,000 effort, so.
Perfect.
Okay. And Ellen, if you don't see an email going out from me to him, copied to you, remind me.
Perfect.
I'll try.
48 Hollis Street.
Okay.
I think that's our
Yep.
last order. I mean, we've got the disposal work and solid permits,
Yeah.
but that's the last biggie.
Yeah, yeah.
When was that done? In December or January?
It was January, it was so cold that day I couldn't go outside, and
I bring
one of
that
the days that
in?
cold in December.
Right, and whenever that public meeting was, which was the late in
It was
February.
before that public meeting and.
Yeah,
meetings.
no, but at that public meeting, Steve Johnson said, oh, we have the results, I'm mailing them out tomorrow morning, or Monday morning.
Well, maybe he did, we just don't know about it.
Yeah, he said,
Well,
well, he'd be
it's-
copying us, so.
48 Hollis Street.
Yeah, for some reason, I couldn't find the plans. Do you know where they are, the building plans? They weren't on the top of the cabinet, but I had kept a copy of at least the note that it had to be reviewed by the board. But they had labeled existing rooms. They're not up there. I went looking for them, and I don't know where they went. I don't know if another department has the plan. I'll go double check
They
again.
don't, other departments don't keep them.
So where would they be?
The buildings, probably.
Oh, you think they're downstairs right now?
Probably.
Boy. Well, it's a large addition, I can tell you what I can remember. What it is they had a septic system designed and put in, and I believe, and this is where I need the,
I think we gotta do with the plans.
well, the septic plans were designed without any waivers. They went from Paul Saunier was the engineer, he said they were going from 4 to 5 bedrooms, but actually from the assessment, I just found out they have 3 bedrooms, they want to go to 5. Again, it was.
But there's no variances.
It was no variances, a new system, but the system is over 3 years old. So, and that's, I explained to the builder, this is the issue, is that it's not really the room count, it's the use of the septic system for more than 3 years now. So it's not a new septic system that had been put in within the last.
So he's adding an
3
addition
years.
to the existing 3-year system. He's saying, I want to add
Yeah,
this.
the system's probably, it was put in, I believe, in 2005.
And so it's
so
not a
it's
room count
15
question,
years
it's
old.
really a question of, can you add to a 13-year-old system?
Correct.
Okay, right now, the state still is using the reference of you can add to anything that met.
That is correct.
Which
And
is
I'm looking at our demolition
25
reconstruction.
years old.
Yeah, so in our demo reconstruction, it gets complicated, and I can pull that out, so.
Are they demoing them?
Well, they're reconstructing to some
they really
degree,
are.
but, well, they're adding a whole new wing to the house, so it's gonna be about probably a 70%, maybe 75% addition. They have a split there right now, and they're gonna add almost like a whole nother section to the split with quite an addition. But, again, the room count won't interfere with the issue of.
It's really just a policy question.
It's the demo reconstruction part of our code that really came to light, and I didn't know if the board wanted they had a recent Title V inspection, I believe, so that it passed. So I didn't know if the board wanted, I don't know what else we can ask for. That's where I kind of get stuck on what do we do with it in our demo reconstruction.
Can we ask for
It talks-
scoping of the parts, or do they?
They don't usually
always
do that,
I
it's just,
know, but
yeah. It's
maybe
a,
that's the thing, just to see if,
yeah.
because I think someone had to scope once before, blocks, debugs.
Oh, they can camera,
and then-
it's not a problem, but
Yeah.
again, they had a passing Title V, and the distribution box will tell you if the system's flooding or not. I can pull our file at least if you want to.
Well, I guess my question is, if we don't, if the guidance from the state is it's allowed, and we don't have a regulation that says it's not allowed.
I'm good.
Can we
If you
just
don't
allow it?
define it as reconstruction, then it would be
Because they're
okay.
retaining the original house, they're just putting way, way, way more house attached.
Major addition to
And
it.
so I think that's different than reconstruction, because I think it's there, right? They're
Yeah,
just like, this is.
They're adding on to the house.
Right, so they're like, we had a 1,200 square foot house.
It's an
soon we'll have a-
addition.
But
Maybe
it's a
could have-
fine line from going from 3 bedrooms to 5.
But what I would say is like, I think for us, the
But the-
question is, first we have to insert, is it a demo and reconstruction? In this case, we're like, it's not, it's just a
No, it's an addition.
ginormous addition that may be bigger than the house, but that doesn't make a demo and reconstruction. That would really be like what they're doing on Ash, where you're like, we have this system, we've torn down
True.
the house, we're now building a new house on it. This isn't that application,
Yes.
right?
Is the system already 5-bedroom?
Yes, it was approved for 5-bedroom. It was originally, it was submitted as a 4 going to 5, but the board could have approved it going from 3 to 5. I think the engineer was probably counting rooms when he said
Okay.
4 bedrooms to 5, but it really back then was based, I believe, on the room count, not the bedroom count.
But regardless, we
It's-
say the
it's-
current system's a 5-bedroom
Yeah.
system.
And they're not gonna be
so we're
exceeding
going
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that seems
I-
open.
Yeah,
I think that's
I think
okay.
it's close.
I
I
got
just-
enough on my
It's a
plate.
fine line on that. It's just that definition of reconstruct. It's just a fine line.
Yeah. I think
Where do we break that off and go to just
Right.
an addition?
Right. I mean, I think it's, and this is it, in this case, is it good for the goal of the homeowner to be a demo and reconstruction, or is it better to be an addition?
They're
I don't
preferring,
think
they're preferring an addition. That's
Yeah,
what
I
they
mean, that's what it
submitted.
sounds like to me, is like an
Yeah, it
addition.
sounds like an addition.
They knew they had
And
that opportunity, so.
Yeah, and that
it
the
just-
system is already there.
Certified, it's a newer system to 1995, so the state code fits perfectly on this. It's just, I kind of got lost with the demolition reconstruction. Does it fit into that
No,
definition?
because it starts to get, like, the flow chart over 50%, and it sounds like it's gonna be over 50%.
But it does have the correct flow.
Right, it has the correct flow, so I mean, that's really
So I
the
think it
bottom line.
follows the rule.
Okay, good.
good.
I just want clarification.
Yeah.
We're here
Even
for
though I
you.
don't have the plans out on the
No, no.
deck to approve right now, but when they do, I'll approve them based on that.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Do we need a motion for anything?
I just, I needed
Disposal works
clarification.
No, no, but
installer
for this, you're
permit.
good. You
Yeah,
just
no,
said
you're good.
clarification, not a motion.
Oh, I see.
Perfect.
I thought you wanted
So
to
the
leave.
renewals?
No, never.
Let's keep it
Never.
moving though, so.
Okay, so we just
You guys
have
should do something
a disposal
pretty
works installer permit, and then we can end the televised, because then it's just paperwork.
Perfect.
So, all right, so we have two, Trufant and FP King Excavating. Are they, everything in good standing? Let's see, they are both renewals, it says.
Trufant, everything is in, they're good. King provided, and his insurance certificate expired, but we've called him, he said he'll get the current one in, so.
Okay, so you would hold on to the permit until that comes in?
Yes.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the two disposal works installer permits?
Additional to pre-construction.
So moved.
Additional,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so Rick, you can end, we're just doing paperwork now and signing of things. Thank you, everyone.